Chapter 1327. The heavenly ghost progenitor was different from the other two clansmen. He was the first heavenly ghost in this world. He was born at the level of the ancestral saints of the various races, so his flesh and bones were incomparably sturdy. Moreover, he was protected by an abnormally powerful blood aura. During the previous battles, even if the sword light struck his body, it would only leave behind a few bloody wounds. The wounds would heal in the blink of an eye. However, under the suction force of the demonic image, he felt his soul shake as if it was about to leave his body. His eyes couldn't help but focus. Fortunately, he was prepared. He only needed to circulate his qi and blood to stabilize it. Zhang Yan had fought with the Fire Mane ancestor before, and he knew that he would not be able to subdue the heavenly ghost ancestor's divine soul if he hurriedly exerted his strength. However, according to his previous plan, he only needed to restrain the opponent for a moment. So after this, he slowly withdrew his divine ability and stood there, adjusting his breathing, accumulating his spiritual power, and waiting silently. Once there was an opportunity, he would launch a thunderous strike. Heavenly Ghost Progenitor sensed that the soul-pulling force was gradually weakening. Just as he was about to take action, an extremely bright light flashed in front of him. He knew that another sword light was coming. He had thought that no matter how sharp the sword was, he would be able to withstand it with his strong body. But this time, it was completely different. He felt his blood and qi pulsating, as if his body was about to be torn apart. Yu Xianshao sneered. In the battle just now, he had used the divine ability of the sword to make a subtle change. He had transformed the sword light into the blood and qi of the heavenly ghost ancestor, and then used it to mix into the heavenly ghost ancestor's body. He had been hiding in the dark until now, and now he was using it to attack the heavenly ghost ancestor from the inside and outside. The heavenly ghost progenitor let out a muffled groan as his muscles swelled, his flesh, blood, tendons, and bones becoming abnormally thick. His entire body seemed to swell. This was because he wanted to detonate his body and release the surging power of blood and qi in his body. This way, he could get rid of all the sword qi. As for the other two clansmen, they could use this opportunity to release them at the same time and solve all the problems at once. However, his body was too tough. Even if a part of it was damaged, it would immediately grow back. Even he himself was unable to complete the most thorough step in an instant, so there was a clear delay in the transformation. At this moment, the endless heavenly river appeared in the surroundings out of nowhere. It was only for an instant. It swallowed him whole. Every drop of the water was formed from the northern underworld true water. Its strength was comparable to a mountain. He felt as if he was being pressed under an endless ocean abyss, unable to move at all. His body, which was about to burst open, was forcefully pushed back. Moreover, these two forces did not stop. One was wreaking havoc on the inside, while the other was constantly pressing down on the outside. Just now, his body had recovered a little, but in the blink of an eye, it was crushed again. Yet, on the surface, it still looked as if he was in perfect condition. Under such circumstances, he couldn't use any divine abilities, so he could only protect his own root fruit. He wanted to use this opportunity to avoid this crisis. However, it only lasted for a few breaths before it gave up. It knew that even if it used up all of its root fruits, it still wouldn't be able to escape. Sect Master Qin and Sect Master Yu had been waiting for this strike for a long time. During this time, they had even discussed it with their divine wills several times. They had almost calculated all of the heavenly ghost's ancestors' subsequent changes, not allowing the opponent any room to resist. At this moment, they kept urging their magic power, causing the divine abilities to change endlessly like a flowing river. This was just like how Venerable Lingya had been fixed by Zhang Yan's earth-raising art all those years ago. There was the help of the root fruit. With the help of the root fruits, there was nothing he could do but be locked in place. If the two sides continued like this, either the heavenly ghost's ancestors' qi and blood would be exhausted, or he would be forced into a long slumber. Either they were forced into a long slumber, or the two sect masters ran out of magic power and stopped in advance. Zhang Yan had already accumulated his magic power to the extreme. The half-real, half-illusory demon image behind him seemed to have completely entered this world. Its appearance could not be described with words, because it seemed to be changing every moment, and once he looked away, it could no longer be imagined. Seeing that the heavenly ghost's ancestor had been trapped, he knew that his chance had come. With a thought, the demon image leaned forward slightly, then sucked in the heavenly ghost's ancestor, who was wrapped in layers of heavenly river water. The heavenly ghost's ancestor felt his soul violently shake, as if it had been hit by something powerful. Then, it began to sway, as if it was about to fly out of his body. He couldn't help but be shocked. He wanted to stabilize himself, but whether it was his body or chi and blood, they couldn't circulate freely under the suppression of the two sect masters. He immediately realized that if he didn't think of a way to break out of this situation, then he would probably die here. I didn't want to use this move in advance. There was some hesitation in his eyes, but in the end he recovered his calmness. At this moment, his vitality and chi and blood began to fade at an extremely strange speed, as if a large hole had been opened in an originally full pool of water, causing it to continuously flow out. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He could sense that the heavenly ghost's ancestor's soul had suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only an empty body. The two sect masters also sensed this change, but they didn't stop because of this. Their magic power continued to pour out. In just a few breaths of time, the heavenly ghost's ancestor's body had turned into a grayish-black stone statue. The two of them pondered for a moment, then withdrew their magic power. Almost at the same time, the stone statue shattered into countless fragments that drifted into the void. Yu Xianxiao said indifferently, "This fellow has indeed moved his soul and qi and blood elsewhere." Sect leader Qi nodded and said, "Let's see where it ends up. Such a powerful blood chi and soul isn't something that just anyone can handle. As long as it shows up in the mountain and sea realm, we'll know immediately." He looked into the endless starry sky. "But if he's not here, then we will have to spend some effort in the future." In their previous discussion, they had anticipated that such a situation might occur. Since the heavenly ghost's ancestor was able to take in two of his own clan members, it was very possible that he could do the exact opposite. Perhaps there was another ghost ancestor hidden somewhere in the mountain and sea realm, or perhaps he was hiding somewhere in the void. If that was the case, then it would be a huge hidden danger. They would have to wait until the mountain and sea realm was pacified before trying to find him. Zhang Yan stood off to the side, lost in thought. When Sect Master Qin saw him like this, he said, "Hall Master Du Jin, have you thought of something?" Zhang Yan turned around, an indescribable light in his eyes. Perhaps disciple knows where the heavenly ghost's ancestor has gone. On a certain snow-capped peak in the northern heaven frigid abyss, the place where the cave had once been was filled with a pool of ice. Tens of thousands of meters below the surface of the ice, a white-robed woman was sleeping. If Zhang Yan were here, he would recognize her as the demonic ancestor Goyu. After signing the indenture with Zhang Yan, the demonic ancestor knew that there would be a war between Heavenly Ghost and the 9 continents. Perhaps in order to avoid being dragged into the conflict, she had hidden herself in this icy plain. Afraid that her aura would leak out and be found by Heavenly Ghost, she had sealed herself in ice below the Heavenly Flame Lake and was prepared to sleep for thousands of years before emerging. However, all of a sudden she frowned, and a look of shock appeared on her face. She seemed to be resisting something and began to struggle with all her might. Given the demonic ancestor's power, a single movement like this would definitely be enough to overturn the continent and destroy this icy plain. But at this moment, her every movement became abnormally powerless. Ripples appeared on the icy water around her, and even her aura was weakening. After an unknown amount of time, she stopped moving, and her entire body retreated into a fist-sized ball of qi and blood, which roiled endlessly. The ball of blood was like a baby in its mother's womb, but it gradually grew bones, flesh, organs, limbs, and head, before slowly transforming into the appearance of the heavenly ghost's ancestor. After a few breaths, the heavenly ghost's ancestor opened her eyes, stretched her body, and straightened her body in the icy water. Back then, in order to not be bound by the world, She had once asked the force beyond the heavens for guidance on how to transcend this world. At that time, she had obtained a secret technique. As the son of Bo Bai, she was originally very powerful, but she was too fierce. She needed to find a descendant of Bo Xian before her cultivation reached the 9 transformations. Once her cultivation reached the 9 transformations, she would be devoured. That way, yin and yang would be harmonious, and there would be a great chance for her to go beyond the heavens. The Go Yu demonic ancestor was a descendant of Buxuan. That was the reason why he didn't kill the demonic ancestor back then. He even secretly did something to it so that he could directly devour it when his cultivation reached a certain level in the future. However, just now, she was forced to a dead end by Zhang Yan and the others. Even though the time was not right, she had to act in advance and directly transfer her qi, blood, and spirit over. He carefully felt it and revealed a look of surprise. The power of her qi and blood was actually much higher than when she was at her peak. However, at the same time, she was filled with hatred. It was almost impossible to find a demonic ancestor like the demonic ancestor Go Yu in this world, unless she waited for tens of thousands of years. If she was not a cultivator of the 9 continents, how could she be like this? Thinking of this, endless killing intent rose in his heart. However, just as this thought came to his mind, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Her qi and essence began to riot uncontrollably, and she could not help but be shocked. If this continued, it would not take long for her qi and blood to be exhausted and die. She desperately tried to stop it, but it was of no use. She did not understand, but just now she had the killing intent, so she immediately obeyed the oath. Since she occupied this body, she also had to bear the karma of this body. Demonic ancestor Go Yu had signed a contract with Zhang Yan before. At this moment, if he could disregard the price and split the demonic ancestor's soul and qi from her body in time, he might be able to escape. It was a pity that the moment he moved over, the two were already tied together and could not be separated. An oath of a contract would cause an effect. If she used her own strength to attack herself, even an immortal body would be useless. After a few breaths, there was a loud bang. The body of the heavenly ghost ancestor collapsed, and her soul scattered. The entire ice pool also exploded. Countless pieces of ice rushed into the sky, followed by a rain of blood. Then, the surging qi and blood surged down from the snowy plains like a waterfall, instantly dyeing this plain white world crimson red. Chapter 1328. The collapse of the heavenly ghost ancestor's fleshly body had caused a huge shockwave, and the towering blood qi had even seeped out of the air barrier. It was truly eye-catching. Within a radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, many demons, devils, and other worldlings sensed the rich life force and essence energy here. They all seemed to go crazy, transforming into beams of blood-colored light that shot toward the area. However, before they could get close, they stopped in place and looked up into the sky. Expressions of terror appeared on their faces, and then they let out mournful wails and fled even faster than when they had come. A huge explosion rang out in the sky. It was the sound of the air barrier shattering. In the next moment, 3 bright beams of light descended. Zhang Yan and the 2 sect masters appeared in the air above the ice field. After defeating the heavenly ghost ancestor, they had been paying attention to the movements in the mountain and sea realm. Just now, as soon as they sensed the aura, they immediately rushed over. Sect Master Qin analyzed the aura and said, Temple Master Duzhen guessed correctly. The heavenly ghost ancestor borrowed the body of the demonic ancestor Go Yu to transfer his qi, blood, and soul. Just now, he must have rashly killed us, so he has fulfilled his oath and died. Zhang Yan smiled and said, It hasn't been long since the heavenly ghost ancestor awoke from its slumber, so it doesn't know what's going on. Otherwise, it wouldn't have barged in. Yu Xianshao said, The 3 ghost ancestors are dead, and the heavenly ghost tribe has no power to stop us. This battle is already won. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then looked up into the sky and said, Once the heavenly ghost ancestor is destroyed, the forces from beyond the heavens will surely make a move. Our 9 continents will have to face them. Yu Xianshao clasped his hands behind his back and said, Then we'll wait for them in the mountain and sea realm. Zhang Yan nodded, then looked around and said, "This place has been nourished by the heavenly ghost ancestors' qi and blood. In a few hundred or even 1,000 years, it will become a blessed land. It will definitely give birth to countless spirit plants, strange birds, and strange beasts. It would be a pity to let the demons and devils occupy this place. In the future, several sects will move here. Guard this place." The three of them chatted for a while, then casually set up several auras and flew away from this place. They returned to Heavenspan Capital's Imperial Palace. In front of the shocking Sky Mountain, more than 30 people from the heavenly abode rode on the wind and stood in the sky. They had been besieging this place for a day and were attacking the World Reflection Tower with their magic treasures and supernatural powers. This way, they could wear down the heavenly ghost ancestors' qi and blood. However, even though Zhu Zhen's heavy rain copper was able to withstand the chaotic magnetic field, it was also constantly being consumed. At most, it could only last for 2 more days. Before it ran out, it would definitely launch an attack. Just the day before, Sui Jianqing had brought dozens of great sages out to fight with them. However, due to the suppression of the Xian technique, even with the help of the World Reflection Pagoda, more than 20 great sages were defeated and killed within a moment. Ghost Realm Master of Ghosts and Emperor and Ancestor. After this battle, Yanzhe also realized that the gap between the two sides was far too great. This was especially the case when they were suppressed by that mysterious power. No matter how many people they sent out, they would not be able to do anything. Hence, he placed all his attention on defending and no longer sent anyone out. Both sides understood that they were not the ones who would decide the outcome of this battle. Instead, it was the Almighties fighting outside the void sky. Ying Chuanqiu listened attentively and said, "Dear Enlightened Masters, just now, Sect Master Enlightened Master has informed me that the heavenly ghost ancestors are dead. You can fight with your full strength." Hearing this, the spirits of the heavenly ghost ancestors were lifted. They looked at each other. At this moment, there was no need to hold back. They made hand seals and summoned the murky serene water. Lu Zhi's expression changed. He could sense that the aura of the cultivators of the 9 continents had changed. His previous cautious attitude had been swept away, and he seemed to have become fearless. Although his side was suppressed, there was no obvious change in the situation. The only explanation was that the situation had changed in favor of the cultivators of the 9 continents. His heart sank and he thought, could it be that the 3 ghost ancestors were defeated? No, the 3 ghost ancestors have immortal bodies. Even if they were defeated, it's impossible that there's no news from them. But he knew that he was just comforting himself. The fact that the Fire Main ghost ancestor didn't return was enough to prove that the opponent had a way to restrain them. Moreover, even if the 3 ghost ancestors didn't go and only fled, they might not have the time to care about their juniors. He clenched the elephant cane. Although he didn't want to believe it, as the leader of the heavenly ghost clans, he had to consider what he should do if such a thing really happened. But no matter how he thought about it, he found that if it was really as he guessed, then the battle had become meaningless. Even if they could repel the enemies in front of them 100 or 1,000 times, a great divine ability comparable to the ghost ancestor would be able to easily wipe them out. But he always felt that there was a glimmer of hope, but he couldn't touch it. There must be a way, but where is the way out? At this moment, he heard a cry of alarm. Your Majesty, it's not good. The World Reflection Tower can't hold on any longer. Luo Zhi suddenly came to his senses. He raised his head and looked outside, and his pupils shrank. He saw that the cultivators of the 9 continents were throwing out streams of deep water vapor. These water vapor lingered in the sky, and whenever the World Reflecting Pagoda touched it, it would immediately melt. In just a short time, thousands of jade pagodas fell from the sky. If this continued, the World Reflection Tower wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Lu Zhi quickly judged the situation and said, Elder Sui Qing, go and tell Elder Qi to retreat. There's no need to entangle with the 9 continents cultivators anymore. This king wants to close the palace gates to stop the enemies. Sui Qing nodded and hurriedly went to deliver the order. Lu Zhi looked to both sides and saw many jade jars. He slammed the elephant cane on the ground, and countless cracking sounds were heard. These jade jars were all broken, and streams of blood poured out. Although it looked like there was only one jar, it flowed out endlessly, and very quickly, like a river, it flowed down the jade steps. Outside the palace, it poured into the circles of blood traces in the square. At this moment, the heavenly palace city seemed to shake. Then, blood curtains rose into the sky and covered the entire mountain peak. This was the blood and chi of the previous clan leaders. In a crisis, they only needed to pour it out and it would gather into a blood and chi barrier. The blood traces were obtained by the Sky Ghost tribe from the forces outside the sky thousands of years ago. Combining the two, the power of the barrier would be even greater. Lu Zhi said, "When the blood and chi of these ancestors are exhausted, it will be the time for us to sacrifice them." The elders below all bowed their heads in agreement. Although the Xian technique sped up the blood and chi circulation, it would not be wasted if the blood was simply poured into the blood traces. Outside the sky-shocking mountain, the world reflection pagodas were dissolved by the 9 prefectures' Taoists' muddy water. The muddy water in their hands was actually not enough to destroy all the pagodas. However, there was no need to do so. As long as about 30% of them were destroyed, the number of jade pagodas would not be able to cover the entire sky-shocking mountain. By then, they could control the escape light and barge in through the gaps. After about 2 hours, Ying Chuanxiu saw that the jade pagodas had become sparse. He thought that it was about time, so he shouted, "Shaoqing cultivators, follow me to kill the enemy." With that, he had already turned into a wisp of clear sword light that streaked across the sky and shot into the palace city. Behind him, the other Shaoqing cultivators also turned into sword lights and followed. They had returned this time to defeat the Sky Ghost tribe and occupy this place. Fortunately, the mountain gate had been rebuilt above. As Shaoqing cultivators, they naturally had to be one step ahead. There was no reason for them to let their fellow cultivators take the lead. The sword cultivators' escape technique was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they passed through the World Reflection Pagoda and arrived in front of the sky-shocking palace city. At that moment, a thick blood screen appeared in front of them. Ying Chuanxiu sensed that this blood screen was slightly different from the ones he had seen before. So, he pressed his sword light and stopped outside. The other Taoists behind him also stopped their escape lights. They took a few glances. This sky-shocking palace was the same as what they had seen in the sky-reaching capital's imperial palace. The entire palace city was deep within the mountain, and there was only one path leading up. In front of them, there were 18 tall stone doors. At that moment, every door was wrapped in a thick layer of blood qi. Ying Chuanxiu turned his head and looked at Sun Huaying. He said, "Taoist Sun, your killing sword lineage has the sharpest attacks among us. You'll be the one to break this blood qi screen." Sun Huaying cupped her hands together and rode the light to arrive before the stone doors. After a short while, a clear ray of light flew up and slashed at the door. The first stone door was split into 2 along with the thick and turbid vital energy and blood on it. At that moment, the second stone door appeared, but it was taller and sturdier than the first one. The blood qi was also thicker. Sun Huaying's expression was cold and solemn. He summoned another sword light and struck down, breaking the second door in an instant. In the next moment, he broke through 7 gates in a row, and each time, he only used a single strike. However, when he reached the 10th gate, he was obstructed. He had to use several strikes in order to break through it, and the further he went, the more strikes he had to use. At that moment, the cultivators of the various sects also flew in and stood around. Ran Xiushu said telepathically, "Master, why didn't you ask Taoist Lu to do this? In terms of the power of the killing sword, junior brother Sun hasn't cultivated for long. After all, he's still lacking." Ying Chuanxiu shook his head and replied, "This shocking sky mountain is going to be our Shaoqing mountain sect. It won't be good if Taoist Lu destroys it." Ran Xiushu suddenly understood. Master is right. Maja looked at the collapsing stone doors outside, but he was not anxious. As long as the blood qi of the last 3 palace doors was not exhausted, they would not be broken. However, at that moment he vaguely grasped a hint of inspiration. Although his side's strength was suppressed, he could see that the cultivators of the 9 continents were not restricted. Logically speaking, if dozens of cultivators from the 9 continents joined forces and attacked with magic treasures, they would have broken in long ago. However, at that moment, it seemed that they were holding back. After breaking the World Gen Tower, they did not destroy it wantonly, as if they were afraid of destroying the boundary. Then, he thought of the matter of occupying the Frost Jade Ocean province and suddenly felt enlightened. He slammed the elephant cane on the ground. This place is useful to the cultivators of the 9 continents. They want to occupy the entire Shocking Sky Mountain. After understanding this, he immediately had a countermeasure. His eyes were bright as he thought, if that's the case, I can use this as a threat to save my people. Chapter 1329. Lu Zhi sat on the throne and pondered for a long while. Then he slowly raised his head and said, "Elders, please be careful." Then he looked at Sui Jianqing and Qi Hua and said, "Elders, please follow me." The 2 elders looked at each other and bowed. Lu Zhi turned and left the hall. He did not stop walking until he reached the Chengzi platform. He ordered the 2 elders to wait below the platform while he walked to the top. There were 5 jade jars at the top of the altar, each containing the essence blood of the previous clan masters. The Yun clan was the descendant of the heavenly ghost progenitor. Before him, there were 4 white kings of the Shocking Sky Mountain. 4 of the jars were full, and the last empty one was left for his clan. After bowing several times in front of the altar, he waved his hand and put the 4 jars into the empty pouch. After standing silently for a while, he walked down the stage with the elephant staff in his hand and said to the 2 elders, "Elders, we definitely can't defend the Heavenly Emperor Palace. We need to find a way out for our clansmen." Sui Jianqing was shocked. "King, why do you say such depressing words? We still have dozens of great sages in the palace, the 9 upper levels, billions of clansmen, and almost 100 Yao saints in the plains. Even if the situation is disadvantageous to us, as long as we can endure for a while, it will not be difficult to defeat the enemy." Lu Zhi shook his head. "There is no such chance. You will understand when you look up." The 2 elders were startled. Both of them raised their heads, looking through the star-gazing cave at the sky. At first, they were puzzled, but after a moment, their bodies shook. Sui Jianqing paled. How can this be?" In the void, the heavenly star that corresponded to the heavenly ghost tribe had shone brilliantly for tens of thousands of years, overshadowing all the other stars. However, at this moment, it was incomparably dim and flickering. Like a candle in the wind, it could go out at any time. Lu Zhi said, "The heavenly star is closely related to the ancestral saints. If I am not wrong, the ancestral saints were no match for the experts of the 9 continents. Our clan has lost our pillar. Therefore, the star has lost its luster and can no longer protect our clansmen." Sui Jianqing refused to believe it, and he said with a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, the ancestral sage is so powerful, how? Lokja said, "If it wasn't like that, why would the heavenly star have such a strange phenomenon?" Sui Jianqing knew that this phenomenon couldn't be faked. No one knew how many demon clans the heavenly ghost had annihilated. Every time before a clan was annihilated, or after a clan's almighty was defeated, the corresponding heavenly star would always dim. There had never been an exception. He immediately became despondent and lamented, "Could it be that my heavenly ghost race's destiny has come to an end?" Qi Hua, on the other hand, stood in place without saying a word. His face was expressionless, but his fingers were trembling slightly. It was obvious that his emotions were fluctuating greatly. Lu Zhi was still calm and said, "In fact, there is a way to avoid this disaster." Qi Hua's body trembled. He looked over and said, "At this stage, even the ancestral saint doesn't know if he's dead or alive. Does His Majesty have any way to resolve this crisis?" Lu Zhi told the 2 of his thoughts just now, and finally said, "I will use Shocking Sky Mountain as a hostage. As long as I don't say anything excessive, I might be able to preserve the vitality of the race." As they spoke, They heard rumbling sounds from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. Luge's expression turned serious. He said, "The people of the 9 continents should have broken through the last 3 gates. We can't delay any longer. This king will head over now." In the great hall, the clan leaders and elders had already cut their wrists open. Blood flowed down in streams. The blood mixed with the blood of the predecessors, causing the last 3 gates to be indistinguishable from their original appearance. Only 3 incredibly thick walls of blood could be seen. Sima Quan's cauldron Liang was hiding among the crowd. Luge opened up the inner area and let the clan leaders and elders come in to hide. At the same time, he wanted to borrow the strength of the crowd. He was one of the top figures of the Cauldron clan, so he naturally came in as well. At this time, he suddenly said, "Clan leader, I have something to say to you." Although Cauldron Yu had lost a lot of blood, he was still full of energy. Without turning his head, he said, "Speak." Sima Quan's gaze became incomparably deep. He transmitted his voice, "Clan leader, you used to be one of us. Do you remember?" Cauldron Yu was at a loss for a moment. Because Sima Quan had planted a demonic thought in his heart, in just a moment his past memories were altered. He remembered that he was a cultivator of the 9 continents. He had cultivated for 3,000 years. Before his lifespan ended, he had taken over the body of this Cauldron clan. It was just that he had been suppressed by the blood of this body, so he had forgotten his original self. Now he finally woke up. He took a breath and transmitted his voice, "Thank you for returning my original appearance." Sima Quan smiled deeply. "It's a small matter." From this moment onwards, Cauldron Yu was no longer the original master of the Cauldron clan. He had completely turned into another person. Unless he was killed or his spirit was destroyed, he could not change back. This was also the power of the Heavenly Demon Secret technique. However, this technique was equivalent to erasing everything in the past. It was also because Cauldron Yu had been with him for a long time that he could use this technique without any hindrance. If it was someone else, it would not be so easy. He chatted with Cauldron Yu for a while, then moved to the side of the Zhu clan leader, Zhu Xian. This person had some relations with this identity. Seeing him come over, he did not have any wariness at all. He hurriedly said, "Zhu Xian greets the upper noble." Sima Quan sighed and smiled bitterly. "Clan leader Zhu, there is no need to talk about upper and lower now. Who knows, in a few hours, my heavenly ghost tribe will no longer exist." Zhu Xian had an irritable temper and would naturally refute these words, but for some reason he felt that these words were very reasonable. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he immediately fell into a trance. A moment later, when he looked at Sima Quan again, there was a hint of respect in his eyes. Sima Quan sent a divine sense transmission, "Just do what you need to do. If there is anything else, I will call you again." Zhu Xian nodded. Sima Quan smiled gloomily and went to find his next target. With his divine sense, if he went all out, in less than half a day, at least 30% of the people here would be infected by his demonic sense. Although not all of them would be controlled, they would at least be able to fight and would no longer be enemies with the cultivators of the 9 continents. He had not done this before because the time was not right, and he was also wary of the means left behind by Guizhou in the palace. Moreover, Heavenly Ghost's divine sense was very strange. Sometimes, it was difficult for people of the same tribe to explain clearly what kind of divine sense they possessed. If that happened, not only would he not be able to obtain any information, he might even fall into their trap. But now, he had no such worries. Guizhou was being held back outside, so it didn't matter if he was exposed. At worst, he could just retreat. But if he succeeded, he would be the biggest contributor to the attack on the Heavenly Ghost tribe, and there would be no obstacles for him to return to Netherspring sect. Maj's group of 3 had already returned to the main hall. The 3 of them had extremely high cultivations among their tribes, and they were also 3 descendants of Guizhou. Sima Quan suspected that they had some kind of secret technique to protect themselves, so he did not attack them and instead retreated far away. Maja looked outside the door and saw sword lights flashing outside the last 3 gates. Every sword strike would cut off a wisp of blood chi. Although he could still hold on for now, he knew that it was only a matter of time. Sooner or later, this place would be broken through. He said, "Two elders, come with this king to meet these cultivators of the 9 continents." With a wave of the elephant staff, he and the 2 elders separated a wisp of their blood chi and transformed it into their own appearance. Then the 3 of them passed through the gates. When they were outside, he looked up and saw many Taoist feather warriors standing in the sky. Each of them had their sleeves fluttering in the wind, looking refreshed and full of the aura of immortals. After watching for a while, he said, "I am Jiongzhe, the ancestor of the heavenly ghost tribe. Please come out and speak with your leader." Ing Chuanxiu signaled Sun Huaying to stop for the time being. He walked out, bowed, and said solemnly, "I, Shaoqing Ing Chuanxiu, am in charge of this matter for the time being. You must be the heavenly ghost White King? May I know what business you have with me?" In Luozhi's eyes, the sword light around Ing Chuanxiu was as bright as stars and lightning. Although he had seen a few cultivators from beyond the heavens, none of them were as good as Ing Chuanxiu. Luozhi's heart trembled slightly. He said, "I see that you are not only here to destroy my clan, but also to occupy the Jingqiong mountain passed down by my ancestors, right?" Ing Chuanxiu said calmly, "You don't need to test me. We, the Shaoqing sect, have the same intention." Jiongzhe nodded and said, "If this shocking sky mountain is destroyed, leaving only a piece of empty land, I believe you would not want to see that, right?" Ing Chuanxiu said in a low voice, "Today, all the spiritual masters of the sects are here. If you think you can use this to threaten us, you are wrong." Luozhi's countenance didn't change. If they didn't have any scruples, they wouldn't have talked to him patiently. He pondered for a while, then lifted his eyes and said, "I know that you are here, and you won't leave easily. I don't dare to expect that. Thus, I won't ask for too much. Today, you just need to let my people go. Even if I give this Jingqiong mountain to you, so what? This way we can avoid a fight." He sincerely thought so. As long as the tribe existed, there was still a chance in the future. The upper 9 tribes of the ancestral tribe and the elites of the Heaven Ghoul tribe must not be destroyed in his hands. Ing Chuanxiu was about to speak, but suddenly heard a voice in his ear, "Ing Zhenren, try to delay him. Give me some time, and I will definitely be able to control him in the inner court and open the palace gate." He recognized Sima Quan's voice. If the other spiritual masters of the Shaoqing sect were here, if they could directly attack the opponent, then other methods would be unnecessary. But he was different. He had been taking care of the sect's affairs for many years, so he had his own shrewdness. He thought for a while and said, "What if I want King White to stay?" Jiongzhe was silent for a while and said, "If you can agree to my request, I can stay." Sui Jianqing was shocked. "King, you can't." Jiongzhe said, "If I exchange my life for the lives of millions of people, is it not worth it?" Sui Jianqing panicked. A ghost face appeared behind him and sent a secret message. "King, the tribe can do without us, but we cannot do without you. There is no one in the tribe who can make you submit. When the time comes, even if the Heaven Ghoul tribe retreats, it will be divided, and it will be difficult for us to do anything." Chapter 1330. Luozhi didn't agree with Sui Jianqing's words. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Even if the cultivators of the 9 continents agree to my conditions, they won't allow my tribe to grow. If my tribe really falls apart, it might not be a bad thing." There were still hundreds of great sages and billions of people in the Heaven Ghoul tribe. He understood that the cultivators of the 9 continents wouldn't tolerate the existence of such a force. Even if they successfully withdrew from Shocking Sky Mountain, they would definitely be suppressed and weakened. But if they split up, they might be able to retain some of their strength. Sui Jianqing said sorrowfully, "My king, if we do this, won't my tribe be at the mercy of others in the future?" Luozhi's voice became heavier. Everything has its ups and downs. Even those people of the 9 continents can't ensure their prosperity for thousands of years. As long as the flame of the upper 9 tribes is not extinguished, what's the big deal about this temporary humiliation? We will come back one day. Sui Jianqing still wanted to say something, but Luozhi interrupted him. "Elder Sui Jian, The cultivators of the 9 continents want me to stay, but they might just be testing me. If I refuse, then this path will be blocked, but if we can come to an agreement, then this matter can still be discussed. Sui Jianqing was startled. He sighed and didn't try to persuade him anymore. Lu Zhi looked at the sky again and said, "If you want me to stay, I will stay. Do you have any other conditions?" Ing Chuanxiu said, "The fact that King White is willing to agree to this matter shows his sincerity. If it were up to me, I wouldn't stop even if I had to destroy this shocking sky mountain. However, I can't make the decision on this matter. I have to report this to the few of you. Please wait a moment, King White." Lu Zhi nodded. "Then I will wait here." Ing Chuanxiu cupped his hands in greeting, then transformed into a beam of sword qi that pierced through the air barrier of the mountains and seas to return to Heavenspan's imperial palace. There he met with Taoist Meng and learned that the 2 sect leaders had returned. They reported this matter. After listening to the report, Yu Xianshao said indifferently, "The collapsed mountain can be rebuilt. The dried-up river can be reunited. We can still meet again, but if the disciples of the younger generation find out that this mountain gate was not fought for by our own family, but was given to us by someone else, then we don't have it." Zhang Yan laughed. "This place has beautiful mountains and rivers, and is the only place in the mountain and sea realm like this. It wouldn't be good if they were destroyed, but Sect Master Yu is right. Right now, the Heaven Ghoul race's ghost ancestors are all dead, and the lives and deaths of the remaining are in our hands. What right do you have to say these things to me?" Sect leader Qin pondered for a moment. He raised his hand and drew a line in the air with his finger. A spell scroll floated in front of him. After that, the talisman floated down and landed in front of Meng Zhen. "Jida, take this talisman and deliver it to Temple Lord Zhou Kong. He will know what to do." After Meng Zhida accepted it, he bowed and left with Ing Chuanxiu. Sima Quan walked back and forth in the hall without leaving a trace. Just now, he had taken control of 2 people. There were also 4 or 5 people whose minds were infected by the demonic energy, but he still felt that his movements were a little slow. This hall was so big that it could accommodate the lake at the foot of the mountain even if it was moved to this place. The clan leaders and elders of the Heaven Ghouls were all surrounded by their clansmen, and they all communicated with each other through secret messages. It would be too eye-catching for him to walk around alone. Right now, Wu Zhi was still standing in the hall. If he noticed that something was wrong, he would immediately be exposed. He changed his mind and decided to muddy the waters. Only then would he be able to act freely. Therefore, he secretly urged one of the Heaven Ghoul clan leaders whose minds were under his control. He pushed aside the people around him and walked to the bottom of the hall. He shouted coldly, "Wu Zhi, I can't believe you want to give your ancestral land to an outsider. I, the Ji clan, will never agree." Sui Jianqing frowned and scolded, "How dare you, lowly commoner, call the king by his name?" The clan leader of the Ji clan showed a disdainful expression and turned around to look at the clan leaders. He said loudly, "Everyone, the Heaven Ghoul tribe and the cultivators of the 9 continents were originally in the Western Sky and Northern Sky respectively. We had nothing to do with each other, but Wu Zhi just had to pass down a false order from beyond the heavens and order us to attack the Northern Sky. We refused to comply, so he threatened and tempted us. In the last few decades, countless of our clansmen have died outside. It would be fine if we won, but the cultivators of the 9 continents forced us to the palace and now want to give our ancestral land to someone else. We, the Ji clan, will never agree." Clan leader Wu Zhi is right. A senior elder also stood up and stared at the stage. He said solemnly, "The ancestral land of Shocking Sky belongs to the Heaven Ghoul tribes, but it is only temporarily loaned to the upper 9 tribes. Don't you think that the king has made such a decision too rashly?" This clan elder obviously had a high status. His words immediately caused a few people to respond, and many more people also spoke up in agreement. For a moment, the square in front of the palace was filled with condemnation. Wu Zhi's face was calm in the face of criticism. Except for the upper 9 tribes, the people of the lower tribes did not have much value in his eyes. It was just that before the 9 continents came out with any reply, he still needed these people. Therefore, he replied, I did not do this out of selfishness, but for the sake of the hundreds of millions of clansmen of the tribes. At this point, he paused for a moment and then said in a low voice, I'm afraid that you do not know, but the 3 ancestral saints have met with misfortune. Sima Quan's expression changed. Although he had also guessed this result, he did not dare to confirm it. He did not think that Wu Zhi would take the initiative to say it. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to the morale of the Heaven Ghoul tribe. After hearing this, the clan leaders and elders of the various tribes became panic-stricken, and there were even people shouting loudly. It was clear that they did not believe this. He laughed coldly and seized the opportunity to invade the minds of many people with his demonic thoughts. While the inner court was in chaos, Wu Zhi's Qi and blood doppelganger had been standing outside, waiting for the response from the 9 continents. After a long time, he saw 2 rays of clear light fly down, knowing that the other side had made a decision. After a while, a large rock that was thousands of feet wide flew out from the hands of a cultivator and floated in the air. From the top, there were countless flying cliffs that filled the sky. Then, rays of light fell down, instantly covering the entire mountain range and the floating islands around it. In Chuanxiu stood up, bowed to him, and then returned to her own side. This action had undoubtedly expressed her attitude. Wu Zhi sighed softly, dispelled the qi and blood doppelganger, and returned to his body through the door. Holding the elephant staff, he stood up from his seat and said, Everyone, the cultivators of the 9 continents have already rejected this king's invitation and are not willing to let the tribes leave. The only choice left is to fight to the death with them. Sima Quan sneered inwardly and slightly activated his demonic thoughts. Not far away, Zhu Xian immediately jumped out and said loudly, Everyone, we don't necessarily have to fight to the death with the cultivators of the 9 continents. Xian has heard that although the Shanyang clan was destroyed, their clansmen did not suffer many losses. Even now, more than half of them are still alive in the earth abyss. It can be seen that the cultivators of the 9 continents do not want to kill us all. Moreover, we are just lowly commoners. Why should we be buried with the nobles of the 9 continents? Most of the Heaven Ghoul clansmen here were lowly people, and his words immediately resonated with them. Moreover, knowing that there was a way out, their original desire to fight to the death with the enemy immediately subsided. Du also stood up and said, That's right. Right now, our bodies are as heavy as a mountain, and the consumption of blood and qi is several times that of the past. How can we fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents? Why don't we surrender to them? We might have a chance to live. Hearing the 2's words, Lu Zhi's eyes shone with a harsh light. He glanced at Qi Hua, and the latter understood. A faint ghost face appeared behind his back, and then an extremely obscure aura was transmitted. This was a divine ability unique to the Qi clan. It could temporarily arouse the hostility in the hearts of the Heaven Ghoul clansmen and control their minds to a certain extent. After entering the formation, it could even make them forget themselves and fight to the death with their enemies. Soon, all the Heaven Ghoul clansmen gradually became short of breath, and their eyes became dull. Other than Du Yu, Zhu Xian, and a few others, the others who were infected by the demonic thoughts seemed to be affected as well. Struggle appeared in their eyes. Sima Quan also noticed the changes outside. He frowned and thought, I didn't think there would be such a divine ability. His thoughts turned, and he decided to act immediately. Although the power he could control right now was not enough compared to what he had imagined, and he didn't know how useful it could be, but if he didn't act, his painstakingly arranged arrangements would be disrupted by this art. He activated his magic power. In the distance, Zhu Xian roared angrily, and showed his Heaven Ghoul body without any care for the consumption of his blood and qi. With a roar, he stomped on the ground, and the bricks cracked. At the same time, flames rose from his body, and countless crimson lights burst out. The plaza in front of the hall was immediately enveloped, and the palace shook. If it wasn't for the fact that this place had been soaked in the blood and qi of the clan masters of the Heaven Ghoul for tens of thousands of years and was unusually sturdy, half of it would have collapsed. Amidst the loud noise, Zhu Xian turned into a giant 300 meters tall, and his body burned like the sun. He walked with heavy steps towards the 3 people on the stage. Sui Jianqing shouted angrily, "Impudent! How dare you show off your divine ability in front of His Majesty?" Lu Zhi's eyes were cold. He raised the elephant staff, and there was a sound of glass shattering. A strange light enveloped Zhu Xian's body. In an instant, the flames on the latter's body disappeared at an extremely fast speed, and his body gradually returned to its original appearance. After a few steps, 2 wisps of blood flew out from his 3 heads, and at the same time, his blood and qi flew out. But after a breath, he staggered, and as if his entire body had been sucked out, he turned into a soft bag of flesh and fell on the steps. Lu Zhi knew that if he didn't get rid of this troublemaker, there would be internal strife on his side. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to deal a heavy blow to intimidate the other tribes. However, his efforts were destined to be in vain. Under Sima Quan's secret instructions, more than 10 people, including Diu, chose to act at the same time, and all launched their blood and qi divine abilities on him and the 2 elders. On the peak of Shocking Sky Mountain, it was as if several suns had exploded, illuminating the plains outside the mountain. And at this moment, the world seemed to shake, and the sound of an explosion came from afar. Then, rocks cracked, and the blood curtain dispersed. It was the 3 gates in front of the palace that had been blown apart by someone. Then, a rumbling river of water came from the sky, rushing into the palace. After the water, there was a flash of spiritual light, a clear air spread, and a powerful aura appeared above the palace. Chapter 1331. When Sima Quan saw the spiritual masters of the various sects barging in one by one, he knew that the outcome was set. The Heavenly Ghost tribe was being suppressed by the Xian technique, so it was impossible for them to cause any more trouble. He was well aware of the changes in people's hearts. In order to make the Heavenly Ghost tribe unable to unite against the enemy, he first sent a sound transmission to Yingchuanqiu and Mengjida, and then ordered all the great sage of the Heavenly Ghost who had been invaded by his demonic thoughts to come closer to the cultivators of the 9 regions. Cauldron Poison Delight was the most deeply corroded by the demonic thoughts. Even its memories were changed, so it did so without hesitation. Just now, the people who had attacked with him all responded and stood by his side. There were even a few elders from smaller clans who weren't under Sima Quan's control. Seeing this scene, some of the Heavenly Ghost great sages who were ready to fight against the foreign enemies suddenly wavered. Lao Zhi frowned slightly. These people's actions were not normal, but it was useless to look into it at the moment. What they needed to do now was to deal with the cultivators of the 9 continents. He could see that these cultivators were no longer as cautious as they were just now. Either they no longer cared about the destruction of Shocking Sky Mountain, or they had a way to preserve this place. Since that was the case, he was not willing to be tied down and could only prepare for the final battle. Looking around, he saw that the elders of the 9 great ministers had brought their subordinates and confidants over. However, there were also a lot of people who stood in the same place and did not move. They also did not side with the cultivators of the 9 continents. It was obvious that they were hoping to get lucky and stay out of this. At this moment, there were only about 10 people who were willing to follow him. He didn't reprimand them, because all of this was meaningless. He indifferently took out a mouthful of the former clan master's blood and drank it. This was enough for him to fight another battle. Sui Jianqing and Qi Hua also took out blood medicines and swallowed them. A short while later, the blood in their bodies surged again. Sima Quan was still hiding among his clansmen, staring at Wu Zhi with evil eyes. Just now, he was testing the waters a little. He wanted to invade Ma Zhi's spirit. However, just now the devil Qi was getting closer, a ghost's face appeared behind him. There was also an inexplicable spiritual vigor blocking his way. He weighed the pros and cons. In order to avoid being detected, Zhang Xian could only wait for a suitable opportunity to strike. In front of the main hall, Mengjida walked out from the crowd. He arrived at the front, bowed his head, and said, "Everyone, we came here today to find those who are colluding with the Outer Realm forces. If the rest of you are willing to back out, we will not make things difficult for you." Du Yu had long regarded himself as a cultivator of the 9 continents who had seized the body of the 9 continents. At this time, he immediately said, "Everyone, the fate of the 9 continents has come to an end. From now on, there's no need to serve them anymore. It's better to rely on the 9 continents and no longer be a lowly commoner." Seeing that many people were hesitating, he knew exactly what they were thinking and sneered. "Are you all afraid of being punished by the people from the upper realm? What a joke! If the upper realm could punish all of you, would Black Beetle have suffered such a defeat today? How could he be so helpless?" As soon as these words came out, many people immediately came to their senses. Immediately, someone anxiously said, "Our Chu-Ching clan is willing to lead our clansmen to pledge allegiance to the 9 regions' true world." After he spoke, there were many tribes who were afraid of losing the opportunity and expressed their willingness to join the 9 regions. One after another, there were more than 500 tribes of various sizes, and more than 40 great sages. This split the originally wavering heavenly ghost forces by more than half. Ing Chuanqiu waited for a while. Seeing that no one else came over, he circulated his magic power, and thousands of sword rays flew out behind him. They turned into meteors that shot through the sky and slashed towards the platform. As soon as he made his move, the other Shaoqing cultivators behind him also took out their flying swords in the sky and slashed from afar. Most of their attacks were aimed at Black Beetle. The people of the other heavenly abodes stood at the side without moving. Although the inner hall of the heavenly abode was vast, it was slightly small for the heavenly abode. Moreover, the heavenly ghosts here had been weakened by the mystic technique, so the Shaoqing cultivators were enough to deal with them. There was no need for them to step forward and intervene. Facing the countless brilliant sword rays, Black Beetle did not dare to be careless. At the same time, he raised his elephant dugu staff in an attempt to block. However, before he could do so, he felt pain in his body. Before he could react, he was already torn into countless pieces. The elephant dugu's staff fell to the ground with a clang. He was not the only one. At this moment, all the heavenly ghoul clansmen standing in the hall were torn into pieces by the sword rays. Streams of blood immediately flowed down the steps of the hall. Like living creatures, they struggled and wriggled there, trying to reform their bodies. However, before they could reform, they were once again cut into pieces by the sword rays. After this happened several times, the heavenly ghost elders who had not consumed the blood medicine earlier could not withstand it. One by one, they lost their vitality and turned into large clumps of turbid blood. Not long after, the clan leaders followed in their footsteps. Soon, there were only 3 clumps of blood energy left in the hall, but it seemed that they could not hold on for much longer. The spiritual masters of the various sects watched this scene and could not help but feel a little surprised. They had thought that the master of the heavenly ghoul clan, Black Beetle, was powerful. Even if the heavenly abodes of the Shaoqing sect could win, they would probably have to experience a fierce battle. They did not expect the other party to be so easy to deal with. In reality, although Black Beetle had some experience in fighting, it was something that happened thousands of years ago. As a descendant of the heavenly ghoul's progenitor, he could naturally restrain ordinary clansmen with his divine abilities. The Western Desolate Domain had long become the world of the heavenly ghoul clan. Since he sat on the throne, he had never fought a battle of life and death with anyone, so it was not strange for him to have such a performance. As for the clan leaders and elders of the upper 9 tribes, they were also good at divine abilities but bad at fighting. If they were given enough time to hone their skills, it would not be difficult for them to defeat some of their powerful clansmen. But now, they did not have such a chance. When the Heaven Ghoul clansmen who had turned to the cultivators of the 9 continents saw this scene, they could not help but secretly rejoice. If they had hesitated even a little just now, they might have ended up the same way. About an hour later, the 2 clumps of blood energy no longer moved. Only the last clump of blood energy was struggling. Mengjin knew that it would not be long before he had a result. He turned his head and looked at where the spirit door was. He said, "Fellow Taoist Dongjin, this King White knows a lot. I will have to trouble you to capture his soul later." As the ancestral master of the heavenly ghoul, Black Beetle frequently came into contact with the forces beyond the heavens. He wanted to capture his soul and find a way to learn the details of the world beyond the heavens. Hibiko Higashi thought for a moment and did not agree immediately. Instead, she said, "I will do my best." If it was another target, she was confident that she could capture his soul into the 9-spirit banner immediately. But this Heaven Ghoul clan leader was a little troublesome. Just now, when she tried to sense his soul, she felt that there was an invisible barrier protecting his soul. It was not the power of blood energy, but a kind of divine ability or secret art. At this time, Black Beetle seemed to realize that he could not fight head-on. He suddenly turned into a beam of bloody light and fled to the back of the palace. He did not want to escape, but he wanted to use the palace's terrain and the few sturdy places to block the sword light. Unfortunately, Shaoqing and the other true masters were experienced in fighting and had long been on guard against the possibility of the enemy escaping. Just now, the bloody light had traveled several meters before it was intercepted by countless flashing lights. Not even a drop of it could escape. At this time, Qing Chunzi sensed something. His sharp gaze fell on a certain place. With a thought, a sword beam slashed down. There was a soft sound at the originally empty place. A pearl was cut out. It did not seem to be damaged at all. With a leap, it turned into a shadow and flew out of the hall in the blink of an eye. Then, it flew into the sky. Just as it was about to escape the air barrier, a great spirit light screen appeared in the sky and sucked it in. In the end, it turned into a pagoda. Qi Hongchan waved above, and the pagoda descended. He sensed it briefly and frowned. He said, "This pearl is broken. There is nothing left." Meng Zhen said in a low voice, "Black Beetle must have been prepared in advance. Or maybe it was the doing of that force from beyond the heavens." The true masters had always been very vigilant against this opponent that they had never met. At this time, they took him even more seriously. Meng Zhen sensed for a moment and sensed that Black Beetle's chi activity had completely dissipated. He looked at Hibiko Higashi and said, "Fellow Taoist Dong Jin, how is it?" Hibiko Higashi shook his head. After this person's spirit and blood were exhausted, his spirit dispersed on its own. "I can't do anything." Sima Quan transmitted his voice. "Meng Zhen, fellow Taoist Dong Jin doesn't need to say that. This person's spirit seems to be protected by something else. I couldn't do anything to him a few times." Meng Zhen thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, there's no need to waste time on this person. The Heavenly Ghost tribe and that force have been in contact for tens of thousands of years. There will definitely be traces left behind. We need to search the palace." Sima Quan said, "This is easy. If the true masters are at ease, why don't you let me do it?" Meng Zhen said, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Sima." Sima Quan didn't dare to say anything. He had hidden in Shocking Sky Mountain for dozens of years and had set up countless chess pieces. With a slight movement of his consciousness, the Heavenly Ghost tribe entered the palace. After a long time, his expression changed. He said, "Two true masters, my subordinates found a person locked in the back of the palace. It doesn't look like a heavenly ghost, but a cultivator." Meng Zhen was surprised. He thought for a moment and asked in a low voice, "A cultivator from beyond the heavens?" Sima Quan nodded. Meng Zhen immediately asked, "Where is he?" Sima Quan said, "Please follow me, true master." He stood up and flew away, transforming into a bloody light. Taoist Meng gave some instructions and followed him. After a while, they arrived at a secret hall. There was a tall black pillar there, and a Taoist with his hair tied up in a high bun was chained there. However, at that moment, his eyes were bright, and he seemed to be very spirited. Meng Zhen sensed and found that this person's aura was similar to that of the heavenly abode spiritual master. However, the spiritual aura on his body fluctuated, sometimes strong and sometimes weak, as if he had suffered some serious injury. The Taoist looked at Meng Zhen without blinking and asked, "You too can come here. Is it because Guzhar is dead?" Sima Quan said, "Yes." The Taoist showed a complicated expression, but he quickly hid it. He slowly stood up, cupped his hands, and said, "Junshin Great Domain, Baohuan Palace, Imperial Conferred True Master Guochenghe, greets fellow Taoist." Chapter 1332. Mengzhen bowed and said, "So it's fellow Taoist of the Great Realm, I, cultivator of the 9 continents, Qinsong School's Mengjida." The so-called Great Realm did not refer to the size of the Zhou region, but referred to the world below it. It was a place where cultivators from the lower realm could fly through. In this situation, it was either the rise and fall of spiritual opportunity that determined the difference between the upper and lower realms, or the living beings in these realms communicated with each other. After a long time, they naturally formed a master-servant relationship. Guochanghe could not help but nod. From Mengzhen's reply, it was not difficult for him to determine that this fellow Taoist in front of him could understand the message in his words. It was either that this fellow Taoist came from another great realm, or that his sex inheritance came from some almighty being. Sima Quan said, "I heard that the Heavenly Ghost Tribe has been killing and capturing cultivators from beyond the heavens for tens of thousands of years. How long have you been trapped here? Are there any other Taoist survivors?" Guochanghe sighed and said, "I have been trapped here for more than 1,000 years. As for Taoist, there are no other Taoist survivors. When I escaped to this blue sky realm, I was alone. The Heavenly Ghost Tribe's leader, Yaozhe, saw that I was skilled in crafting things, so he let me stay." Blue sky realm? Sima Quan thought for a moment and realized that this was what the cultivators of the Junshan realm called the mountain and sea realm. Zhenren Meng, on the other hand, was slightly moved when he heard this. Back then, he had also traveled through the void primordial sea and understood the dangers inside. He said in a low voice, "It's especially not easy to travel between 2 realms. Fellow Taoist, you're actually able to come here alone. It's really impressive." Guochanghe said, "There's nothing to hide. I was able to reach this place by relying on a Dharma artifact known as the Great Raising Rhinoceros like a boat. It was forged by the combined efforts of 1,000 master craftsmen of my Baohuan palace. However, because we lacked a type of rare metal, it collapsed after we reached this place and broke through the heaven and earth barrier. At that time, I was also heavily injured. Unfortunately, I landed in the western desolate domain. If not, I would not have been captured so easily by the Heavenly Ghost Tribe." Mengzhen said, "Although you were trapped for 1,000 years, you managed to preserve your life. Now that I've escaped, the tribulation is over, and I can enjoy freedom in the future." Guochanghe shook his head and said, "Not necessarily." Sima Quan saw that his expression was solemn, and there was a hint of worry between his brows. He asked, "Why do you say that, fellow Taoist?" Guochanghe looked up. He said, "I know you two have many questions, but I must first find the sky-piercing dial and 2-realm ceremonial tablet that the Heavenly Ghoul Race's master, Qizhe, had hidden here. We can speak after I see them." Sima Quan asked about the appearance of the 2 items, then ordered his demonic-willed doppelgangers to keep an eye out for them. After a while, he said, "The item that fellow Taoist mentioned has been found. It's behind this palace." Guochanghe said solemnly, "I don't know if the 2 of you trust me, but those 2 items must be handled properly. I must go there personally." At this time, Sect Master Qin's voice suddenly sounded in Mengzhen's ears. "Let this person go." So he nodded and said, "As you wish, fellow Taoist." Guochanghe's eyes lit up. He raised his hand, and the golden chain that locked it immediately made a clanking sound. "My transcendence energy has been restricted. Can I trouble the 2 of you to help me free this item?" Mengzhen looked at the golden chain. He didn't know what precious material was used to forge it, but he felt that it was unusually sturdy. It probably couldn't be broken with ordinary methods. However, this didn't mean that he had no way. After a moment of thought, he took out a drop of muddy serene water and pointed at it. Guochanghe felt his wrist lighten. The golden chain dissolved without a sound. It wasn't just cut in the middle, but the entire chain was completely corroded. There wasn't a trace left. The drop of serene water in Mengzhen's hand was also used up. There wasn't even a drop left. It was enough to show that his transcendence energy was circulating. He had already reached the realm of minute subtlety. Guochanghe's expression didn't change, but he was secretly shocked. The golden chain was something the Heavenly Ghost Tribe had obtained from the Junshan Great Realm. It was called the Purple Beard Golden Chain. It didn't look special on the surface, but there were tens of millions of tendons and tendons strung on it. Every single one of them was forged by the skilled craftsmen of the Junqin Great Realm. They were twisted and refined together. They were both tough and sturdy, and almost nothing could cut them apart. He originally thought that if he wanted to regain his freedom, he could only break the profound pillar. Perhaps he would need to wear this golden chain for a long time in the future. He didn't think that it could be dissolved so easily. He instantly realized that the cultivators he was facing from another realm probably didn't have simple origins. With this thought, his attitude towards Mengjin became more serious. However, this wasn't the time to think about this. He apologized and said to Sima Quan, "Where are those 2 items now? Can I trouble this fellow Taoist to take me there?" Sima Quan didn't move. He turned to look at Mengjin. When the latter nodded, he took a step to the side and said, "Fellow Taoist, please follow me." The 3 walked out of this place. After walking for a few miles and passing through several mountain paths, their eyes suddenly widened. A tall sacrificial altar appeared in front of them. Above it, they could see the vast sky and stars hanging in the sky. It was the Qingzi sacrificial altar that the Heavenly Ghost Tribe's master, Yaozhi, used to communicate with the higher realms. This high platform was divided into 3 parts. The middle one was the highest, and there were many sacrificial utensils of unknown uses. On the left and right sides, there were 2 items. They were the sky-piercing gate and the 2 realms ceremonial tablet that Guchanghe mentioned. The sky-piercing gate was a large jade that looked like a round platform. It was wrapped in an indiscernible number of golden rails. It was spinning slowly as if it was displaying the wonders of the universe and stars. The 2 realms ceremonial tablet was like a hollow jade ball that floated in the air. If one looked into it, they would be able to see into the void of another world. There were countless precious materials and spirit medicines piled under the sacrificial altar. There were also many slumbering beasts and demons. They were all chained up. It looked like they were prepared to be used as sacrifices to the heavens. When Guchanghe arrived here, his expression became even more serious. He walked onto the platform and walked in front of the sky-piercing gate. He closed his eyes and focused. He reached out and pressed on it. He could feel the spirit energy around him slowly gathering. Mengjin watched from the side. He could see that this Taoist seemed to be examining something. Although this person was imprisoned by the heavenly ghost, he wouldn't easily trust him just because of a few words. Fortunately, sect leader Qin and the others were also paying attention to this place, so he wasn't afraid of him playing any tricks. After a long time, Guchanghe opened his eyes and shook his head. He said, "It's too late." He sighed. "It looks like we can't avoid it after all." Sima Quan's eyes flashed. He said, "What do you mean by that?" Guchanghe didn't answer. Instead, he thought for a while and turned around. He looked at Mengjin and solemnly said, "I wonder if you can bring me to meet the person in charge of your sect? I have an urgent matter to report." When Taoist Master Meng heard this, he paused for a moment, as if he was listening to something. Then he nodded and said, "My sect master has already agreed to this matter. Allow me to make some arrangements here and bring you over." Guchanghe was secretly startled. Only now did he realize that his every move and action had fallen into the eyes of the powerhouses of the 9 continents. Fortunately, he really did not do anything improper, so he said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. This poor Taoist will wait here." Mengjin said to Sima Quan, "I will be back soon." "Thank you, Master Sima, for taking care of Taoist Gua." Sima Quan bowed and said, "I will take care of it." After Mengjin left, Sima Quan looked at Guchanghe and said, "Taoist friend's cultivation is similar to mine. I wonder what the cultivation methods are like in Junqin realm?" Guchanghe knew that the other party was using this as an excuse to find out about his background. However, this wasn't a secret. Moreover, he knew that the people of the 2 realms would definitely come into contact with each other. Therefore, he didn't hide anything. As long as he knew, he would tell them the truth. The cultivators of Junqin realm were the same as the cultivators of the 9 continents. They both belonged to the Qi path. Therefore, the cultivation methods of both were roughly similar. However, because the cultivators were closely connected to the mortal world, there was no longer a difference in realms. Instead, they were represented by the ranks of Taoists. Before cultivators opened their profound veins, they were all called Qilang. Once they opened their profound veins, they could bestow imprints. From then on, they could be called Taoist masters. They could travel everywhere and spread Tao. As for the next step up, it was called fairy building. They could build temples and offer sacrifices. However, they also had the responsibility of making clouds and rain, observing the water and soil, and controlling the weather. Above the fairy building was called open normal. At this step, they were like the monarchs of the mortal world. They had the power to kill the living beings under their rule. After that, it was the Shangyu. Even the lowest rank could enjoy 100 Kai Chang worshippers. As long as they didn't commit the crime of rebelling against the imperial court, no one could take away their position or kill them without an official edict. As for the position of true sovereign, it was different. The imperial court would consecrate all kinds of external medicine. Normally, they would sit in the sea of clouds on crouching immortal mountain and absorb the pure spirit of heaven and earth. They didn't need to care about the outside world. Only when the enemy true sovereign came to attack would they be asked to appear. Within each type of Taoist official, there were 3 levels. They were determined by their clothing and cultivation. As for those above true sovereign, Guochanghe didn't mention it. It seemed like he was avoiding something. When Sima Quan heard this, he felt that his horizons were broadened. He then asked about the general situation in Junchen world. Just now he knew that this world was different from the 9 continents and the mountain sea. The sects were distributed on different stars and had dealings with each other. As for how many sects there were in this world, even Guochanghe didn't know. After Meng Zhen went outside, he discussed with Ing Chuanxiu for a while. He felt that it wasn't appropriate to reveal Guochanghe's existence. He decided to leave the rest of the matters to his disciples. They would personally escort Guochanghe to the imperial palace of Tong Tian capital. So he called Qi Yun Tian and Qing Chenzi over and carefully instructed them. Although the imperial palace of Tong Tian was breached, and most of the heavenly demons had surrendered, there were still hundreds of demon great sages on the cloud plains. This was a force that couldn't be ignored. They needed to seize the opportunity to subdue them. Once the effects of the Shen technique wore off, it would be several times more difficult to do so. After giving the instructions, they returned to the back hall. Meng Zhen brought out a great Wei cloud tower and invited Guochanghe up. Then he soared into the sky. Chapter 1353. In the boundless void of the mountain and sea realm, a speck of light suddenly appeared. Then, the heaven and earth gate was knocked open, and a shuttle-shaped magical ship with 2 pointed ends rushed into the realm. After a long time, 3 people wearing wide-sleeved robes emerged from the void. The one in the lead was an old man with a crown on his head. His eyes were sharp, and he had a dignified air about him. As soon as he arrived outside, he said, "True Lord Song, quickly put away the Star River shuttle so that its aura doesn't leak out." The man called True Lord Wu said yes, then performed an incantation gesture and recited an incantation. The glittering light around the magical ship gradually dimmed until it was the size of a fist. He took it and put it away in his sleeve. After doing that, he just now had the time to look around. Looking at the dazzling stars, he asked, "True Lord Wu, is this the blue sky realm?" The old man with the crown said, "According to the maps sent by the Heaven Ghoul tribe, we should be in the void of this realm. According to the information sent by the Heaven Ghoul tribe, this place is different from the Junchen realm. There are no living beings on the stars, and the essence of this realm lies in the boundless land mass. We'll be heading there soon." The 3 of them were all true monarchs of the Jade Liang cult. This time, they flew to this world under the orders of the cult master, Kong Ing. The heavenly ghost had been defeated, and the bull flood dragon had surrendered to the sects of the 9 continents. Yuliangism had lost all of its spies, so it had no idea what was going on in the mountain and sea realm. All it knew was that this place had been occupied by a group of cultivators from another realm. As for how strong they were, It was impossible to determine. If they wanted to move their realm here, they couldn't just come here blindly. The reason they had sent the three of them here was because they wanted to find out more about their opponents. The old man with the crown glanced to the side, where a young Taoist in his 30s stood. "True Lord Gong," he said, "this is your ancestral land. As for how to get to the Blue Sky realm, we'll need your help." True Lord Gong said seriously, "How could I dare? The sect leader has entrusted me with such an important task. I will naturally do my best." His surname was Gong and his name was Shichu. He was the grandson of great ceremony eunuch Shao who flew to Junqian realm 7,000 years ago. This time, the upper echelons of Yuliangism saw his relationship with Eastern Wasteland Gong family, so they sent him over. The crowned elder said, "That's good." Immortal Gong took out an astrolabe. After fiddling with it for a while, he shone it outside. Immediately, the light representing a certain direction lit up. He looked in that direction and explained, "The two of you. In the mountain and sea realm, there is no such thing as a jade nose. Therefore, the mysterious needle is of no use. Furthermore, in all the heavens, the clear sky continent is the place where spiritual energy flourishes the most. Therefore, all we have to do is look in that direction." True Lord Song said, "Now that we know the location, things will be easier." He raised his finger and pointed at the space between his eyebrows. A rainbow light flew out and instantly transformed into a long and narrow Dharma boat. He cupped his hands at the old man and said, "True Lord Wu, please." The crowned elder nodded at him. He took the lead and entered. Song and Gong followed behind him. After they sat down, the Dharma boat moved and transformed into a beam of light. As they moved forward, the boat gradually disappeared. Because there were many stars in the great dust realm, cultivators often flew through the void. Therefore, the Dharma boats they used were extraordinary. Not only could they hide their location, but they could also move through space. It only took the three of them about a year to get close to the mountain and sea realm. However, a layer of fog seemed to be pushed aside in front of them. Following that, a boundless land was revealed. It was a land where the beginning and end could not be seen. When they first saw it, they couldn't help but feel shocked. At that moment, True Lord Song felt as though he and the others were about to crash into it. He couldn't help but sigh deeply. The wonders of creation are unfathomable. Exactly. The crowned elder was still calm. He said, "The Heaven Ghoul race has already been destroyed. In order to guard against us, the cultivators of the 9 continents might have set up some sort of barrier. True Lords, please be careful. If they discover our tracks, I'm afraid you'll wish you were dead." Gong and Song's expressions both tensed up. They nodded in agreement. The three of them each went to a position and pressed down on the center of the formation. They poured their magic power into it and then waited with rapt attention. In a flash, a layer of mist appeared on the body of the magic boat that was originally invisible, and it silently passed through the air barrier. During this process, there was no unusual movement. The crowned elder's expression was solemn. He said, "Be careful." The other two didn't say anything. Instead, they were very vigilant about their surroundings. According to the plan they had discussed before, if they were discovered by the cultivators of the 9 continents, they would immediately abandon the Dharma boat and escape separately. When the situation was over, they would try to contact them. After traveling for a long time, the three of them didn't sense any movement. They couldn't help but feel relieved. The crowned elder's expression was also not as tense as before. However, he still reminded them, "We can't be careless until we're in a safe place." The two of them nodded. In fact, the reason why they were able to enter the mountain sea land so easily was because the grand formation that the sects of the 9 continents had set up to cover the mountains and rivers of the mountain and sea realm spirit veins had yet to be completed. Most importantly, the Dharma boat that the three of them were on was concealed by the decree bestowed by the sect master of Yuliangism, Kong Ying, so it was even harder for them to be discovered. The flying boat slowly descended from the sky and quickly approached the land. However, the place where they landed this time was intentionally towards the west. For the past 10,000 years, the Heaven Ghoul race had never stopped offering sacrifices. However, it was mainly to obtain more benefits from the higher realm. At the same time, they used the name of the higher realm to rule over their people. However, the heads of the Heaven Ghoul race were very clear-headed. They had never offered any maps of the mountains and rivers. They didn't even explain in detail how many races there were in the lower realm. As for the ox-dragon demon forefather, they seemed to have a tacit understanding. They either evaded the matter or simply sent some specious information. Even now, the Junchen realm had a very vague understanding of the geography of the mountain and sea realm. They only knew that the west of the Heaven Ghoul race's territory was a vast and barren land. There were many great demons running amok. It was not a place that cultivators liked. If they landed there, they would be able to avoid detection by the cultivators of the 9 continents. The land west of Firmament Shocker Mountain had been replaced by lush greenery. From time to time, a sword light would fly through the sky. Last month, this place had just experienced the attack of a migrating demon tribe, and there was filthy chi and blood everywhere. On the surface, numerous demon dragons, who were specially used to carry and transport, were constantly swallowing the corpses of these demon beasts into their stomachs so that they could bring them back to refine precious medicines and magic tools. At the top of a large tree, there was a young Taoist dressed in a white robe. He reclined there with his hands supporting his head. His clothes were neat and clean, and there was a sword light spinning above his head. He was accompanied by a white tiger. However, it was so young that at first glance, it looked like a cat. The white tiger had been lying there lazily, but now it seemed to sense something. It suddenly stood up and stared ahead. Its fur stood on end, and it growled in a guarded manner. The young Taoist frowned and reached out to stroke the tiger's head. Then he looked off into the distance and muttered to himself, "Is there another demon coming?" His white tiger was a strange species of the mountain and sea realm. He had obtained it by chance. Ever since he had been by his side, whenever a great enemy appeared, it would immediately act like this. There had never been a mistake. In fact, the last few times a demon tribe had attacked from underground, it had been because of this tiger that they had discovered it. The young Taoist thought for a moment, then said, let's send 2 demon dragons to scout first. Then we'll make plans." He shook his sleeves and let out 2 startling dragons. He whispered a few words to them, and the 2 demon dragons immediately turned invisible and snuck into the wind. If it was any other cultivator of the Shaoqing lineage, they would definitely immediately ride their swords over to take a look. However, he was different. Other than refining his swords, he also enjoyed commanding beasts to serve him. Moreover, he was rather skilled in using them. It was also because of this that he had the greatest battle results among those of the same generation in the few battles he had with the demon clans. At this moment, the magic ship that flew over from the sky had landed on the ground. 3 Junchen realm cultivators walked out, but they were still covered by talismans. If someone were to look down from the sky, they would see that there was nothing here. Song Zhenjun walked outside and breathed in and out. He exclaimed, "What a dense spiritual opportunity. It's not inferior to the upper stars of our Yuliangism. Why didn't you come to such a good place and let others take it?" The elder with a crown shook his head and said, "You make it sound easy. I haven't even refined the talisman then, so how could I come over? Besides, there aren't many flying talismans. Other than a few of us, none of the disciples of the sect can come over." Gong Zhenjun cupped his hands and said, "You too, I'll go to the East Wasteland Nation right now. This nation is where the 100 nations are. The nobles and relatives of the Gong family are all descendants of the Gong family. If I can contact them, I can persuade them to help me. Then, the matter that the sect master asked me to do will be very easy." The elder with a crown said, "You're right. The 3 of us are outsiders after all. If we can get the Gong family's help, it's already half done. Then, I'll leave this matter to you." Gong Zhenjun. Gong Shichu hurriedly said that he didn't dare to. The other party was Kong Ying's trusted subordinate. He didn't dare to put on airs in front of him. After bowing again, he leaped into the sky and disappeared. Song Juanjin said, "Can Gong Zhenjun really succeed?" The elder with a crown said coldly, "Then we'll see if the Gong family is as easy to rope in as they say." Song Juanjin said, "Then how about I come down later?" The elder with a crown said solemnly, "There's no need to be impatient. Let's find a place to hide first. We'll decide what to do when Gong Shichu comes back." Song Juanjin repeatedly said yes. He threw out a cone-shaped talisman. This thing could be hidden underground. Once they reached that place, they wouldn't have to worry about being found again. Just as they were about to go inside, the elder with a crown exclaimed in surprise. His eyes flashed and 2 bolts of lightning flew out. With a crack, 2 strange beasts that were charred black fell down one after another. Song True Lord walked over and asked, "True Lord Wu, did you discover something?" The elder with a crown took a few glances and said, "It's nothing. These should be some strange beasts in the blue sky realm." Although he said that, for some reason, he felt that something was wrong. With a wave of his hand, he turned the 2 remains into ashes. Chapter 1354. The 2 frightening dragons were killed in an instant. The young Taoist sensed something in his heart. He let out a sound of surprise and was surprised. As the startling dragons knew the art of concealment, it was difficult for ordinary demons to discover their tracks. Furthermore, they flew quickly, so even if they exposed their flaws, they could escape in time. Not only that, these dragon demons were also extremely intelligent. When the 2 of them moved together, they would not usually move together. Instead, they would move one after the other. That way, if something happened to one of them, the other would be able to return and report. However, they disappeared together this time, which made him feel that it was extremely unusual. In such a situation, it was very likely that the enemy was much stronger than them, so they were killed before they could react. "Oh, I might have encountered a demon saint this time. No matter what, there's nothing wrong with being careful. It's better to report to the sect first." The young Taoist sent a warning to the disciples around him. Then he patted his sleeves and stood up, saying, "Little cat, let's go." The little white tiger leaped onto his shoulder. With a thought, a sword light enveloped his body, and he fled towards a mountain range tens of thousands of kilometers away. The western wastelands was close to the shocking Sky Mountain. It could be considered the Shaoqing sect's backyard. Even though many of the Grotto Heavens people had gone to compete beyond the sky, at least one would stay behind to watch over this place. Recently, the Shaoqing sect's elder Feng Xianzhao had been watching over this place. The cloud light where he was drifted erratically, as if it was flashing rapidly. It was as if all the changes in the world had happened in an instant. The young Taoist arrived at this place. As he went deeper into the mountains, he gradually understood something. Unknowingly, he stopped and stood there quietly. When he came to his senses, he realized that the sun was already leaning towards the west. He blinked his eyes. He didn't want to delay things just because he wanted to understand something. However, since it was already too late, he was no longer in a hurry. He walked up the mountain unhurriedly and arrived in front of the temple. He landed and greeted the disciple on duty. After a while, he was summoned and entered the inner room. He saw a middle-aged Taoist sitting on a praying mat, his body shining like stars. He knew that he could not look at him for too long, so he lowered his head and bowed. Disciple Chu Ziqin greets spiritual master Feng. Feng Xianzhao looked at him and said, I remember you. Not too long ago, you were ranked first in the evaluation of contributions, and you even debated with quite a few of your fellow disciples. You really made quite a name for yourself." Chu Ziqian, on the other hand, was not embarrassed at all. He said in a carefree manner, "This disciple borrowed a lot of external help this time and was criticized by many senior and junior brothers for not being the only way to use the sword. I am also a person with a temper. I have no choice but to discuss it with my fellow disciples." Feng Xianzhao sighed. Though we Shaoqing cultivators are sincere in our pursuit of the sword, if we insist on doing so, we will fall into a trap instead. If we were to encounter a life-threatening situation, wouldn't we use a magic treasure that could save our lives? I, Shaoqing, also need to set up the mountain gate array and use spiritual opportunity to cultivate. Speaking of which, these are all external objects. Do I have to give them all up? From this, it could be seen that the so-called only using the sword was actually using the sword as the most important thing, and not just abandoning the sword. I don't care about other things. As long as I understand what's important, there won't be any hindrance. When Chu Zichen heard this, he immediately puffed out his chest and said, "This disciple understands. The next time someone mentions it, this disciple will say the same." Feng Xianzhao laughed. "You can use my name if you want, but I will test you once every half a year. If your cultivation doesn't improve, I will take away one of your external objects." Chu Zichen blinked. How could he not know that Feng Xianzhao was intentionally giving him pointers? In terms of lineage, though he was Sun Huaying's grand disciple, he cultivated the extreme sword. There were not many pointers that could be passed down to him. Feng Xianzhao, on the other hand, was the only remaining elder of the extreme sword lineage. If he could receive some pointers from him, it would save him a lot of trouble. Chu Zichen bowed and coughed. This disciple doesn't have many external objects. I hope that Feng Xianzhao can go easy on me. Feng Xianzhao laughed. That will depend on yourself. With a wave of his hand, a sword ray flew off the jade platform. I'll let you study this sword ray. I will take it back after half a year. This time, he wasn't acting on a whim, and it was instead because he just noticed that this disciple of his was actually able to comprehend something by merely relying on a strand of his aura. That was why he'd aroused such thoughts. Chu Zichen allowed the sword ray to enter his glabella and bowed again. Thank you, Feng Xianzhao. Feng Xuanzhao's expression turned serious. I remember that you were on duty outside. What did you discover when you came to my place? Chu Zichen did not hesitate and immediately told him what he had encountered just now. In the end, he said, disciples, 2 startling dragons were able to put up a fight even if they encountered Yuanine cultivators. Yet, they were killed at the same time. Aside from demonic sages, I'm afraid that it would be difficult to achieve such a feat, Feng Xianzhao pondered. After the wasteland became an oasis, many demons had come to invade. This was something that the Shaoqing sect was happy to see, but so far, no demonic sages had come to invade. This was not surprising. The Heaven Ghoul race might have many demonic sages, but they were backed by the entire Western Absolute Domain and had a huge population. They were spread across the entire continent, so it was like a stone thrown into the sea. It was not very eye-catching. According to the Shaoqing sect's previous estimates, the mountains and rivers here just now had regained some vitality. There were still very few living beings here, and most of them were birds and insects. They were not very attractive to demonic sages. They had thought that it would take at least 100 years for such demons to come. They did not expect to encounter them so soon. However, all of this was just a guess. He had to see it for himself to make a judgment. He said, I will go there to take a look in a moment. Go down and pass on my orders. Order the disciples to return to the forbidden formation. Before I return, they are not allowed to go out. Chu Zichen raised his hand and bowed, saying, This disciple understands. After Gong Shichu parted with Song and Wu, he headed for the eastern wasteland. Even though he had a flying and teleportation artifact, he was afraid that the cultivators of the 9 states would notice, so he did not dare to use it. Instead, he used an escape talisman that Kong Ying had given him. His speed was not slow either. About a year later, he finally reached the eastern wasteland. The country furthest west was Fuxiang. However, when he reached the borders of this country, he found that something was wrong. Many eastern wasteland profound cultivators came and went on flying boats. Occasionally, he saw 1 or 2 Qi cultivators flying past. That was not all. Almost every palace city was protected by a great formation. He could not help but be shocked. Yuliangism had learned from the bull dragon that the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland and the cultivators of the 9 states had already formed an alliance. However, he did not expect that the 2 sides were in such collusion. He could not help but feel a little worried about this trip. However, since he was already here, there was no turning back. He could only grit his teeth and continue. After that, he became even more careful. He specially chose the desolate mountains and rivers to walk through. His journey was bumpy, and it took him another few months to reach the borders of the eastern wasteland. This place was where the capital of the god nation was. It could be considered his ancestral land. However, looking at the mountains and rivers here, his eyes were very calm. He had been cultivating in the Junshin world since he was young. He did not have any special feelings about this world. Even before he came here, he did not know much more than the other two true lords. He did not choose to enter the city. Instead, he looked to the south. There was a long shadow of a mountain there. The ridge of the mountain was undulating and winding, like a giant dragon lying on the ground. He thought, the Hunglong mountain that Grandpa mentioned should be here. The Gong family walked out of this mountain at first. Later, this place was regarded as a secret ancestral land. Because there was a qi and blood barrier left behind by the three high priests, it was impossible for anyone who was not a member of the Gong family to enter the stone gate. Moreover, this place was the last retreat of the Gong family. There were many treasures buried in the mountain. However, he did not come here to take anything. He came here to prove his identity. If he wanted to negotiate with the Gong family, he first had to gain their trust. He was indeed the descendant of the high priest, but there was no proof. No one would believe him easily. However, after passing through the stone gate, no one would doubt him anymore. There was an advantage here. The Gong family would not let outsiders come here. He could avoid the eyes and ears of the cultivators of the 9 continents. Just as he was about to fly over, he frowned and suppressed his magic power. After a while, several rays of light flew over. Among them, there seemed to be a few people who casually glanced over. However, because the difference in cultivation was too big, no one could discover his existence. However, there were many cultivators of the 9 continents here. After standing for a while, several groups of cultivators flew over. Gong Shichu thought about it, took out a pill and swallowed it. This pill was to suppress his aura. Although he could do it with his magic power, if he met cultivators of the same generation, there was a high chance that he would be exposed. After the pill dissolved, he saw that there were no more movements in the sky, so he burrowed into the ground in the direction of the horizontal dragon. A day later, he arrived at the foot of the mountain. Following the instructions of the high priest, he quickly found the location of the blood and qi barrier. When he got close, he immediately raised his finger and cut his wrist. Immediately, a pool of blood flowed out. He was conferred the title of a true monarch, so he could naturally travel with his Dharmakaya. However, this time, in order to enter this place, he had to bring his physical body. As the blood dripped, the blood and qi barrier also melted, revealing a door. He immediately stepped inside. He only felt his body tremble slightly, and he successfully arrived in a valley. He saw a waterfall falling from a height of thousands of feet, rumbling. Whether it was near or far, almost the belly of the mountain was hollowed out and built into a solid stone mansion. When he arrived here, because he did not conceal his aura, it immediately alerted the guards in the valley. With a flash of blood light, a white-haired old man appeared. He was obviously in the mystic enlightenment realm. He looked at him and found that there was no vigorous blood and qi on his body. Instead, his aura was very similar to that of the cultivators of the 9 continents. He was surprised and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you? How did you get here?" Gong Shichu followed the ancient etiquette and put his hands together. He bowed and said, "Don't be alarmed, clan elder. I am not an outsider. I am the 3rd-generation descendant of the high priest, Gong Shichu." "What? The high priest descendant?" The old man was full of shock. He stared at Gong Shichu with his eyes wide open. He did not speak for a long time, as if he was digesting this news. After a long time, he said in a deep voice, "You can pass the blood and qi barrier so easily. It is enough to prove that you are a descendant of the Gong family. However, you said that you are the high priest's descendant, but what proof do you have?" Chapter 1355. Gong Shichu untied a blood jade from his waist and handed it over. "Before I left, Grandpa ordered me to bring this along. He said someone in the clan would be able to identify it." The elder took a few steps forward and received it solemnly. He flipped it in his hand and looked at it a few times. Then he glanced at Gong Shichu. Please wait here for a moment. Gong Shichu sensed it and felt an obscure qi activity in the deeper parts of the valley. According to the information given by the Bull Dragon clan, there were at most 5 mystic realm cultivators in the Eastern Barren Kingdom. But now, it seemed that there were more than that. The Gong clan was indeed the descendant of the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom. However, based on the current situation, the old man's vitality had dried up and he didn't have much lifespan left. He was only barely able to maintain his vitality after consuming a secret medicine. If they were to fight, it would only take a single battle to take his life. After a while, the elder walked out again and said in a deep voice, "This is indeed what the 2 priests took away. You are indeed a descendant of the Gong clan." Gong Shichu heard the subtle meaning in the elder's words. The elder only acknowledged him as a descendant of the Gong clan, but didn't immediately admit that he was a descendant of the 2 priests. But everything had to be done step by step. This was a good start. The elder looked at him with burning eyes. "I have something to ask. Where did you come from?" Gong Shichu smiled and bowed. "Naturally, I came from the upper realm that the 2 priests went to. We all call it by the name of the Junqian Great Realm." The elder had already guessed this. But after hearing this answer, he couldn't help but sigh. He looked at Gong Shichu with a complicated gaze. "If you came earlier, perhaps," he stopped mid-sentence and shook his head. "It's useless to talk about this now. You can stay here for now. There are some things that need to be discussed slowly." Gong Shichu knew that this matter couldn't be rushed. He put his hands together and bowed. "I will listen to the arrangements of the clan." The elder's expression softened a little. He said, "I am Gong Su Tao, the sect master of the ancestral land. Except for the ancestral worship ground, you can go anywhere in this place. You can choose a pavilion to stay in. If you need anything, you can tell the spirits in the valley. They will bring it for you." Gong Shichu wanted to agree, but he changed his mind. He said, "If I want the cultivation resources of qi practitioners, can I get them?" Gong Shu Tao gave him a deep look and said, "If you want, as long as it isn't something that's too rare, you can get it." Gong Shichu frowned. He had asked this question not because he really wanted something, but because he wanted to use it to figure out how deep the collusion between the Eastern Wasteland Nation and the sects of the 9 continents was. Now it seemed that it was far beyond his imagination. Gong Shu Tao saw that he did not have any requests. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, however, he'd only taken a single step when he stopped and turned around halfway before he asked in a seemingly unintentional manner, "Right, I wonder how the 2 high priests are doing?" Gong Shichu raised his head slightly and said, "Thank you, Elder Zong, for asking. Grandfather and granduncle, one is called Emperor Cheng, and the other Emperor Qi. Each of them presides over a region of the heavens and has billions of lives under their rule." Gong Su Tao didn't know what the title Emperor and Heaven Domain represented, but from Gong Shichu's tone and expression, he could tell that these represented something extraordinary. He nodded. Without saying anything more, he turned around and left. Only when that figure completely disappeared did Gong Shichu put away the arrogance on his face. Just now, he was praising the 2 high priests. Although what he said was the truth, after the 2 of them broke through the heaven and earth barrier and flew to Junqian realm. At the start, it wasn't smooth. Because the 2 of them didn't cultivate Qi Path and didn't know how to use talismans, their combat strength was weaker than Qi Path cultivators. For a long time, they weren't worshipped as imperial emperors. However, the 2 of them weren't ordinary. Because they were behind others, they didn't hesitate to lower themselves and ask for guidance. And they had their own advantages. In Junqian realm, other than imperial emperors, no one was a match for them. After 3,000 or 4,000 years, as their cultivation deepened, they learned from each other's strengths to make up for their weaknesses. Not only did they forge many talismans, but they also discovered some divine abilities. Only then did they catch up, and they had the right to be on equal footing with the imperial emperors of Junqian realm. Because the Tao of Qi and blood they cultivated required less spiritual energy than other people of the same generation, they attracted quite a few people to join them. The sect they had established in their own heavenly region had gradually become a powerful organization. Furthermore, They were even planning to bring people from the mountain and sea realm here to compete with the powers of the heavens. Unfortunately, Yuliangism rose, and the power of sect leader Kong In wasn't something they could fight against. They could only submit to him. Otherwise, they might have created a new situation. There was a rustling sound, and a vine reached down from the mountain wall. It turned into a short spirit, who clasped his hands and said, "Where would you like to stay, esteemed guest? The mountain walls in the valley all have good palaces. If you decide, I can tidy up the place." Gong Shichu nodded. He looked up and saw a cave abode at the highest point. He said, "That's it." After Gong Su Tao returned to the cave abode, he immediately used a secret technique to spread the news of the descendant of the Gong family returning from beyond the heavens to Bodu City. When the 5 grand mystic cultivators of the Gong family received the news, they were also shocked. The cultivators of Junshin realm were coming, and it wasn't a secret to them. But they didn't expect that the first ones to come were the descendants of the 2 high priests. They all realized that this was a serious matter, and if they didn't handle it well, Eastern Barren Country might be destroyed. So they gathered and discussed for half a day. In the end, they came up with 2 opinions. One was to immediately detain this person, and then send him to the hands of the cultivators of the 9 continents. The other was that they couldn't act rashly. Who knew how many people the other party had sent? Moreover, he was the descendant of the 2 high priests, and a member of the same clan, so they couldn't treat him like this. Gong Shizao said, "No matter what, we have to get to the bottom of this person's intentions. But the 5 of us can't leave the capital." Everyone frowned. They wouldn't be at ease if they weren't there, but if they went, they would cause a huge commotion. It was obvious that something big had happened. One of the grand mystic cultivators frowned. "Are we going to bring this person over for questioning? There are many cultivators in the palace now, and it's easy for news to leak." Gong Shizao said, "There's no need for that. We exchanged for quite a few psychic jade walls from the cultivators of the 9 continents. We can send one over, and there won't be any commotion." There weren't any psychic jade walls in the mountain and sea realm. These spirit stones were all brought over by the cultivators of the 9 continents. However, not only were they easily damaged, they were also rare. Eastern Barren Country had to pay a great price to exchange for a dozen pieces. Everyone discussed it again and all agreed that it was feasible. Thus, they immediately sent their people to deliver the psychic jade wall overnight. On the second day, a letter arrived, stating that the item had arrived in the valley. Gong Shizao stood up from his seat and said to the 4 grand mystic cultivators, "Let us meet this descendant of the high priest." He walked to the front of the psychic jade wall and channeled his blood chi and spiritual opportunity into it. After a while, Gong Shichu's figure appeared. He smiled at him in a friendly manner and raised his hand to bow. Gong Shizao stared at him for a while before returning the bow. After putting it down, he said in a deep voice, "We know who you are, but we still don't know why you're here." Gong Shichu didn't hide anything. He said, "I'm sorry, everyone. I came back because the 2 high priests heard that the cultivators of the 9 continents stole the land of the blue sky realm, plundering treasures and medicines, and slaughtering the living beings of the realm. They couldn't bear it, so they sent me here to contact old friends and drive them away." Gong Shizao sneered. "Easy for you to say. How can the 100 nations of the Eastern Barren Country fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents?" Gong Shichu said calmly, "Everyone, you've misunderstood. The 2 high priests don't want the clan to take action. Instead, they only need the clan to find out the specific strength and techniques of the 9 continents cultivators, and then inform the upper realm. That would be enough." Gong Shizao didn't deny it. Gong Shichu smiled. He also guessed that the people of the Gong family wouldn't agree so easily. However, since he dared to come here, he naturally had a way to move them. He said in a low voice, "Do you know how to get to the Purple Sun realm?" As soon as he said that, he clearly felt the blood chi in the psychic jade wall on the other side flourish. Gong Shizao, who was talking to him, had the same expression as just now, but there was an obvious change in the other's eyes. When he saw this, he added fuel to the fire. "Before we left, The two high priests told us that if our clansmen were willing to cooperate with us, we could hand over the secret technique and let everyone comprehend it. Gong Shizeo took a deep breath. He knew that there was no need to continue. He raised his hand, and the psychic jade wall shook. Gong Shichu's figure disappeared. He turned around. Seeing that everyone was silent, he said, "Do you want the secret method? Or do you think it's just giving out some information and not betraying the alliance?" Seeing that no one spoke, he snorted and said, "No matter what you think, I will only say one thing. If there weren't the cultivators of the 9 continents, how could the Eastern Barren country have today's prosperous situation?" Everyone nodded silently. They had no choice but to admit that this was the truth. Everything had changed because of the arrival of the cultivators of the 9 continents. At most, in 300 to 400 years, they would be able to recover the entire eastern wasteland and return to the situation when they were at their peak. Gong Shizeo sneered again. If there weren't the cultivators of the 9 continents here, would those people of the upper realms still need to ask for our permission? Would they still need to inquire for information? I'm afraid they would have already attacked. Hearing this, everyone's heart trembled. Gong Shizeo's gaze was like a knife, sweeping across everyone's faces. He said sternly, 7,000 years ago, the two high priests abandoned their clansmen and went to the Junqin Great Domain. As a result, the rise of our human path was cut off. Not only did we lose our territory, we were also split into more than 100 countries. We were bullied and humiliated by many different tribes, and could only hide in the Cloud Plains. Now that the situation is slightly better, these two just need to say a word and they want us back. How can there be such an easy thing in this world? Chapter 1356. The secret technique that the two high priests took out was indeed a great temptation to the great mystic cultivators of Eastern Wasteland. It could be said that when Gongshi first mentioned this condition, everyone, including Gong Shizeo, was moved. There were many benefits to reaching the Purple Sun realm. For one, their cultivation would increase, and their lifespan would increase. These were all visible. In the grand scheme of things, the Eastern Wasteland had been divided into hundreds of countries for a long time, and it was almost impossible to reunite them. However, once such a person appeared, he would be able to rebuild the divine kingdom with great power, and such a person would be able to stand on equal footing with the 9 states Upper Jinren. However, as Gongshi Tao said, if the Junqin realm's emissary had come earlier, they might have accepted this condition immediately. Unfortunately, how could the situation now be compared to the past? 100 years ago, the 100 nations of Eastern Wasteland were just holed up in a corner. Facing the hostile demons and other races, they were in danger of being destroyed at any time. At that time, every great mystic cultivator had the heavy responsibility of protecting the nation and couldn't find enough time to climb to a higher realm. However, once the cultivators of the 9 states arrived and formed an alliance with the 100 nations of Eastern Wasteland, the nation's power increased greatly. After wiping out the surrounding foreign races, there would be no more enemies, and they could calm down and cultivate. Other than the above points, there was another more realistic problem. Nowadays, many of the descendants of the nobles were cultivating in the various sections. Before the alliance was officially formed, this was the practice of the nations using their sons as hostages. Now, many of the disciples had returned one after another, and there were also some who stayed on the mountain to continue their cultivation. Both sides were influencing each other, and in the past few decades, the two sides had formed a situation where there was a connection between you and me. Therefore, this time, the 100 countries of the Eastern Wasteland had to stand on the side of the cultivators of the 9 continents. After these thoughts flashed through everyone's mind, the greed from before was gradually suppressed, and rationality took the upper hand. Gong Shizeo saw that his fellow clansmen's gazes had calmed down from the burning passion, and he heaved a sigh of relief. When he spoke just now, he was also slightly nervous. Just now, as long as one person stood up to oppose, it would likely incite the others. Once the bottom line was broken, it would be hard to suppress it anymore. Fortunately, no one lost their heads. He softened his tone and said, "Everyone, Please think about the actions of Yuliangism. Now that this person is here, our 100 nations must act according to his rules. Can you all tolerate this? The expressions of the great mystic cultivators changed slightly. They were also skeptical about the rules of Yuliangism that Zhenjuangua mentioned, but what if it was true? They would simply become puppets in the hands of others, and none of them would be willing to do so. A young great mystic cultivator with a qi and blood pattern on his name said, "Ziwe is right. Since the two high priests have left, according to fellow Taoist Jiuzhou, the karma of the 100 nations of the East Wilderness has been severed. Since our ancestors could cultivate to the Purple Sun realm, our descendants can do the same if they have enough time. We don't need them to give us charity." The only one who had a similar status as Gongshi Zhao was the sun sacrificial Gongxianao. He also said slowly, "Let's not talk about the betrayal of the alliance, which the 100 nations of the East Wilderness would never do. Even if it was someone from the upper realm, would they treat us like fellow Taoist Jiuzhou?" After the three of them expressed their stance, the other two looked at each other and didn't insist anymore. One of the elders pondered and said, "Then we'll capture Gong Shichu and send him to the cultivators of the 9 continents." Gongshi Zhao said, "It's not difficult to capture this person. No matter how powerful he is only one person, and he is still in the ancestral land. However, before we act, we need to invite fellow Taoist Jiuzhou over to be a witness. In case something unexpected happens, we can't say please." Gongxian Ao said, "Let's do that. This matter is the most important. We can't delay, or else Gong Shichu might notice something wrong." He turned his head and looked at the young great mystic cultivator. "Now, perfected Qi is in charge of the Dragon Abyss Sea. Elder Fan, immediately ride the cloud whale to the Dragon Abyss and report this matter to perfected Qi." After a pause, he said, "Tell the truth, don't leave anything out." Gong Fanchong put his hands together and bowed. "Fanchong will leave now." He nodded to the others in the hall and turned to leave. Not even half a day after he left, the inner palace of Bodu City was filled with clouds and mist. As a big whale appeared, LV Junyang, Shenbai Shuang, Duda, and Gong Fanchong appeared together. Gong Fanchong bowed to the three of them. "That person is currently in my ancestral land. It is inconvenient for outsiders to enter. Please wait for a moment in the palace. We will capture him and bring him here, then hand him over to you to deal with." Shen Baishuang said, "Then we will wait here." Seeing that the people of the 9 continents had arrived, Gong Shizhao no longer had any scruples. He called out and flew toward the ancestral land with the other 2 great mystic cultivators. Soon, they arrived at the boundary. They broke through the qi and blood barrier and went straight into the inner palace. With a slight sense, they knew where Gong Shichu was. Gong Shizhao ordered the elders in the valley to guard below while he and the other 2 great mystic cultivators came to the door of the cave abode and pushed the door open. He glanced at Gong Shichu, who was sitting on the cattail hassock, and said in a deep voice, "Are you going to surrender yourself, or do you want me to help you?" Gong Shichu was a little surprised. From the other party's words, it wasn't hard to infer that the Gong clan had completely sided with the cultivators of the 9 continents. He didn't expect that the other party could actually suppress the temptation of the secret technique and make a decision so quickly. He couldn't help but sigh. "I didn't expect the Gong clan to be so unwise." Gong Shizhao said indifferently, "How we do things is not up to you, an outsider, to comment." "Outsider?" Gong Shichu chuckled and said, "You don't even know the power of the higher world's Vedanta. With the power of our Yuliangism, the sects of the 9 continents are not able to resist us." Gong Shizhao sneered and said, "Aren't you the descendant of the 2 high priests? How did you become a disciple of Yuliangism?" Gong Shichu snorted and said, "What's the difference? Hierarch Kong is powerful, and the 2 high priests have long joined the cult. The hierarch's power is already unimaginable. Not only is there no one in the Junshin realm who can resist him, no one in the 9 continents is a match for him." Gong Shizhao sneered and said, "If Kong Ing is really as powerful as he said, why would he send you here? It's obvious that he doesn't have the confidence." The other two great mystic cultivators were expressionless and also unmoved. For people like them, once they weighed the pros and cons and made up their minds, they would rarely waver. Gong Shichu frowned and said doubtfully, "You know the hierarch's name?" He immediately realized and said, "You have Junqian realm Taoists who wandered here? Or do you have a spy in the Junqian realm?" Gong Shizao ignored him and raised his hand to press down. Qi and blood patterns instantly fell from the stone residence and were carved on Gong Shichu's body. Gong Shichu did not resist. Even though his dharma was not ordinary, these qi and blood patterns were left by the ancestors of the Gong family. He could not win against the Gong family clansmen no matter what. In next to no time, his entire body was coiled up by numerous strands of crimson light. Moreover, because he possessed the bloodline of the Gong clan, he'd already fused together with the vital energy and blood of the Gong clan, so it was utterly impossible for external forces to forcefully break him apart within 100 days. Gong Shizao saw that he had surrendered, so he waved his hand and released a qi and blood wing to wrap him up. Then he left with the other two great mystic cultivators. In less than 2 hours, they returned to Bodu City. The three rode the qi and blood light and successfully landed in the inner court. Shen Baishuang and the other two were already waiting here. He looked at Gong Shichu and said, "Is it this person?" Gong Shizao said, "Yes." Shen Baishuang bowed and said, "This time, I have to thank Eastern Wasteland Taoist." Gong Shizao also bowed and said in a deep voice, "This is what my Gong family should do. Since the establishment of the Eastern Wasteland country for 7,000 years, we have never betrayed our allies." Gong Shichu smiled in disdain. He believed that the Gong family clansmen would regret this choice in the future. Then, he turned his gaze and examined Shen Baishuang and the others. This was also the first time he met a cultivator from the 9 continents. Although he could not use any magical techniques, because the two of them were standing close to each other, he tried to sense the aura of the cultivator. It was just that with this observation, his originally casual attitude suddenly became somewhat restrained, and his expression also became serious. They were all cultivators of the Qi path, but because of the different inherited techniques, there was naturally a difference in strength. He could tell with one glance that the 3 people in front of him all had pure Qi, and it was obvious that the Dharma they cultivated was extremely profound. If it was only one person, it would be fine. It meant that their sect had a profound Dharma, which was not surprising. However, the 3 people in front of him all had the same Dharma, which was not simple. Also, looking at the style of their robes, they should be from the same sect, which was enough to show that the sect behind them had a profound foundation. He thought, "Looks like the opponent this time is not simple. It's a pity that I can't send the news back for now, but it's not like there's no chance." Shen Baishuang glanced at Gong Shichu and reached out to take his sleeve. He examined it for a moment, and in a few breaths, he opened it. Then he injected his mana into it and found that other than a few bottles of medicinal pills, there were only 2 talismans and a spirit boat. Other than that, there was nothing else. He said indifferently, "There's no dual realm dial here. If this person didn't bury this item in a suitable place, then there must be more than one cultivator of Junqian who came to this world. There must be other people who came with him." Gong Shizao said, "If the person is in the palace, it's not hard to find him, but if he is in the wilderness, then it will take some effort." He raised his head again. "I wonder if the 2 from the Grand Priest Guild also came with him?" Shen Baishuang waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry. If someone with the cultivation of your Grand Priest Guild broke through the world and came back, then when he knocked open the heaven and earth door, it will definitely cause a huge commotion. The 9 continents will definitely notice it, and at that time, we will definitely protect the safety of our alliance." Gong Shizao was waiting for this sentence, so he immediately put his hands together and bowed. Shen Baishuang flicked his sleeve and threw out a human bag. He put Gong Shichu in it, then said goodbye to the cultivators of Eastern Barren Country and returned to the back of the Cloud Whale with LV Junyang and Duda. However, when the Cloud Whale's body was covered in mist, he raised his hand and used his mana to suppress the Qi activity of this big whale. When everyone was confused, he said in a calm tone, this time, we won't sit on this big whale. We will just fly back to the sect. When Gong Shichu heard this, even though his expression didn't change, the qi activity of his body fluctuated slightly. Chapter 1357. P.S. Here's today's update, and at the same time, poll votes for Chidian's 515 Fan Festival. Everyone has 8 votes, and there will be some coins for voting. I'm begging for everyone's support and appreciation. Shen Baishuang did not use the cloud whale to prevent any accidents from happening. The heavenly ghost had used the cloud whale for a long time, and the sects in the 9 continents also used it. The Junyang realm might know about it too. If they targeted this point and did some tricks during the teleportation, there would be no way to guard against it. It was true that Gong Shichu's mana was sealed, but if Venerable Fan 2 had left something on him, they might not be able to see through it with their cultivation. On the other hand, if they were just flying through the air, then they wouldn't have to worry about all of this unless Gong Shichu's companions came to their rescue. However, that was exactly what they wished for. Once they showed themselves, they wouldn't be able to conceal themselves any longer. Shen Baishuang raised his hand and pointed at the empty space in front of him. An abode appeared out of nowhere, and he said, "Venerables, please follow me." LV Junyang and Duda followed him into the abode, and they realized that it was a different world. There was a waterside pavilion, a flowing spring, a warm pavilion, and everything was prepared. There were also red-crowned cranes and white deer jumping. It was full of vitality. Shen Baishuang flicked his sleeve and sent the human bag that had imprisoned Gong Shichu into the water in front of him. Then he took out a spell, and a golden lock tied him up and dragged him to the bottom of the water to suppress him. After that, he turned around and said, "You can walk around freely here, please do as you please." LV Junyang and Duda bowed to each other and found a pavilion to sit down. 10 days later, they felt a slight tremble under them. Shen Baishuang said, "We've reached the boundary." As he said that, he pushed open the door and walked out first. LV Junyang and Duda also walked out together, but they realized that this was not where the mountain gate was, but an isolated island. There was a formation altar on the island, and after a quick check, they realized that this was the west of the Dragon Abyss Sea. It was not far from the mountain gate, but it was not near either. It happened to be in the middle of the 6 sects of the spiritual sects, Shaoqing and Qinsong. Shen Baishuang walked to the formation altar and personally cast a spell. He tied Gong Shichu up here. The reason why he did this was to prevent the Junshin world from using this person's help to find out about Yutsong sect's background and then spread it out. Outside the mountain gate, Yuliangism would not be able to use any of its unfathomable methods. After everything was set up, he went down the altar and said, "Spiritual Master Lu, go back to the sect and report that we have detained that person on Solitary Heart Island. Please tell the sect how to deal with him." LV Junyang agreed and immediately went to the next island with the help of the transfer restriction array set up by Qinsong School. Traveling in this manner for more than 10 days, he returned to the mountain gate. He stepped on the clouds and entered the floating heavenly palace. After reporting, he entered the hall. He saw Qi Yuntian standing in the hall with his hands behind his back. Standing on both sides were the 2nd and 3rd generation disciples. There were more than 100 of them, and they seemed to be discussing something. He bowed and said, "Palace Protector Lu Junyang has returned to report." Qi Yuntian said, "Protector Lu, you may dispense with the formalities. How was your trip? Did it go well?" LV Junyang recounted his journey in detail. Qi Yuntian listened. He said, "Jinren Shin's way of handling things this time is also safe. Custodian Lu, return to Solitary Heart Island first and guard that place with Jinren Shin, and Jinren, you must keep an eye on this person. Then we'll go to the island to investigate." LV Junyang cupped his hands and left the hall. Guan Yingyue said, "Teacher, now that we have captured this person, can we get some information about Junshin world from him?" Qi Yuntian said, "That is useless. Since Junshin world sent this person here, they would definitely be prepared for us to capture him. Either his knowledge is limited or he isn't afraid of us searching. We just need to keep an eye on him." Guan Yingyue asked, "Benevolent master, does that mean this person is of no use to me?" Qi Yuntian said, "No, no matter how well he hides, since he came from beyond the heavens, it is impossible that he didn't leave any traces. There are many spell altars and formations in Eastern Barren Country. As long as we check them one by one, it is not difficult to determine where he landed." Guan Inyue volunteered, "Teacher, disciple is willing to do this." Qi Yuntian thought for a while and said, "This time, the allies from Eastern Barren have a stable footing and are not influenced by the ancestors from beyond the heavens. The 9 continents cannot let them bear this responsibility for nothing. Help me send 300 flying ships, 1,000 ships of blood medicine, and a flying heaven palace to them. Also, find this person's tracks." Guan Inyue said, "Disciple obeys." Qi Yuntian said, "This is an important matter. You can use the people here as you wish." Guan Inyue raised his head and looked to both sides. There were many disciples in Upper Extreme Hall. Now that he had received orders from Qi Yuntian, he could even use Meng Zhen's disciples in name. There were many people who could listen to him. However, when it came to capturing Qi, it was not important. The key was the heart. Only those who were familiar with him could use it. Just now, he could rest assured. Originally, he had his eyes on Zhou Xian and Qi Mingjiao. Not only were they strong, they were also more experienced than Daoren. Unfortunately, a few years ago, the two of them had already reincarnated. After looking around, his eyes finally landed on 2 cultivators. They were both his junior apprentice brothers. One was called Chao Yusong and the other was called Zhui. The former was steady, while the latter was usually full of ideas. It was a good time to bring them along. He said, "Junior apprentice brother Chao, junior apprentice brother Zhu, are you all willing to come with me?" The 2 cultivators who were called stood up and said, "We are willing to listen to senior apprentice brother's orders." Guan Inyue said yes and picked a dozen more disciples. When he felt that he had gathered enough people, he bowed to Qi Yuntian and left with a group of people. Qi Yuntian waited for him to leave. He turned to the disciple who was standing in front of the hall and said, "Send a talisman down. Invite all the sects Jinren to Xing Ying Hall for a discussion." The disciple bowed and said, "Disciple will arrange it right away." A moment later, the disciple returned and said, "Jinren, please move the chariot." Qi Yuntian turned around and strode into the side hall. On both sides of the hall, there were more than 10 spiritual jade walls. He waved his sleeves and his mana surged. Instantly, the jade walls vibrated and the hall shone brightly. Then, the heads of the various sects and the people in charge appeared on the jade walls. They bowed and said, "Greetings, spiritual master Qi." Qi Yuntian returned the greeting. After exchanging a few words, he said, "Today, I have invited the various Taoists here because a cultivator from the Junqian realm snuck into the mountain and sea realm a few days ago. He is the descendant of the original 2 high priests of the Eastern Wasteland's divine kingdom. This time, he was ordered by the 2 high priests to incite the Gong clan to betray us and find out the truth of our sections. Fortunately, the Taoists of the Eastern Wastelands did not betray their alliance. They captured this person and handed him over to me. At this moment, he is being held captive on an isolated island." When the various sects Jinren heard this, their expressions became solemn. Although the 100 nations of the Eastern Wastelands were not that powerful, they had been in contact for a long time and had a certain understanding of the cultivators of the 9 states. Even if they did nothing, if the information they knew leaked out, it would be extremely disadvantageous to the various sections. Qi Hongchan asked in a low voice, "Jinren Qi, did he come alone?" Qi Yuntian said, "We did not find the dual realm dial on him. He should have someone else with him. It has been less than 50 years since the heavenly ghost was destroyed. No matter how fast he is, it should be within 34 years or even shorter. When you return, please carefully search the sect. First, to prevent this person from sneaking in, and second, to find him as soon as possible." Tens of thousands of zhang underground in the Western Wastelands, there was already a cave abode. The old man with the crown and true Lord Song from the Junqian realm were standing in front of a pond. The pond was filled with branches and leaves, and the water was dark green. Tiny insects could be seen crawling around in it. True Lord Song nodded in satisfaction and said, "Fortunately, this realm is full of spiritual vigor, and this insect can be raised. Now we have another method, and the 2 years of hard work is not in vain." The old man with the crown was also in a good mood and said, "In another 1 or 2 months, this insect will mature, and then we can bring it out." This insect was called the 10,000 humble insect. It was so small that it was hard to see with the naked eye. Once it was released, it could blend into the atmosphere's spiritual vigor. Once a cultivator with a low cultivation base cultivated, if there was this insect nearby, it would drill into their body and settle down. As if there was an insect king in their hands, they could use it to observe their every move. However, this insect's lifespan was short. If it was released, it could only live for 2 to 3 days. Moreover, it required a large amount of precious materials to grow it, so this was not a normal method. It was only used under special circumstances. True Lord Song took out a jade token and looked at it. He frowned and said, "When True Lord Gong left, he said that within 2 years he would send news back. Now that the time has come, and there is still no news, it seems that something has happened." The old man with the crown frowned and said, "He has the sect master's talisman on him, so we don't have to worry about him leaking out. However, if he is captured, the cultivators of the 9 continents will be vigilant, and it will be very disadvantageous for us. Looks like we have to wait for a while, and we have stayed here for too long. We need to move to another realm as soon as possible." True Lord Song knew what he meant. It was indeed inappropriate to stay here for too long. In fact, if it was not for these 10,000 humble insects, they would have left long ago. He said, "Then where should we hide later?" The old man with the crown said, "Retreat to the depths of the west. It is difficult for the forces of the 9 continents to reach there, and there are many demons there. It will be easy for them to cover our tracks." Half a day later, 2 sword lights flew over from the east and appeared in the sky. It was Qing Chunzi and Feng Xianzhao. Feng Xianzhao pointed down and said, "Last time, Chu Shaoqian's 2 frightening dragons disappeared here. I came to investigate, but there was no trace of them. They were either devoured by the demons, or their physical bodies have turned to dust." Qing Chunzi's sharp gaze swept around, and he took out a hand seal. Instantly, sword rays flew out, and then turned into tens of thousands of them, shooting in all directions. Some shot into the ground, and some even pierced through the sky, almost covering the entire domain. This was the secret technique of the sword transformation sect, clear spirit in the sky. Under the illumination of this technique, the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth was like a cup of clear water. Any part of it that was contaminated by external qi would be like a trace of filth, and it would appear out of place. Unless the opponent's cultivation was much higher than the caster, no matter how good the concealment technique was, there would be a trace of disharmony. After a few hours, Qing Chunzi retracted his sword light and said coldly, "There is a hollow 10,000 feet underground. It was formed naturally, and someone used to stay there. Although there is no trace of that person now, it should be just now." Chapter 1358. P.S. I present today's update, and at the same time, poll votes for Chidian's 515 Fan Festival. Everyone gets 8 votes, and you can get some coins for voting. I beg for your support. Qing Chunzi and Feng Xianzhao had come to search for the cultivator from the Junqian realm. However, there were some demons and devils that would lie dormant underground, so it was impossible to determine the identity of the owner of the cave. As for whether or not the person had come from beyond the heavens, they would have to investigate further to find out. After the 2 of them discussed for a while longer, they continued to descend. Soon, they passed tens of thousands of feet underground and landed in the cave. Qing Chunzi looked around with a sharp gaze. The aura here has been completely wiped clean. The demons and devils of the mountain and sea realm only cultivate qi and blood, so there's no way they could do something like this. Feng Xianzhao looked around and agreed with Qing Chunzi. The cave wasn't very large, only about 30 meters wide. If the demons of the mountain and sea realm reached the demon saint level, their bodies would be huge, and they wouldn't curl up in such a small cave. Even if they slept here, they would have set up a chi and blood barrier. Considering what had happened 2 years ago, it was highly likely that this was left behind by the cultivator from the Junshin realm. He walked around in a circle, but didn't find anything. It seems the person here is very confident, and isn't afraid of us searching for him. The fact that the other party had been able to pass through meant that he had a cultivation base in the paradise. Destroying this place would have been a simple matter, and would have covered up many of his traces. However, he hadn't done so, which meant that he was confident that even if the cultivators of the 9 continents found this place, they wouldn't be able to find him. Qing Chenzi walked to the edge of one of the pools and took a few glances. He could tell that there was something important placed here. The edges were polished to a smooth, round, and spotless surface. If it was an ordinary qi storage pool, it wouldn't be like this. However, the other party had cleaned it up very cleanly. Other than what could be seen on the surface, nothing else had been left behind. He looked around for a moment, then summoned his flying sword, which glowed brightly. The light illuminated the entire cave, not even leaving out the smallest nooks and crannies. After a while, he retracted his magic and said coldly, "Some tricks. I was almost tricked." Just now, he felt that the other party had only been gone for half a day. But now, when he used the technique again, it was clear that several hours had passed. However, this feeling did not change in the slightest. This was clearly an arrangement that the other party had intentionally left behind. As the saying goes, what's fake is real, and what's real is fake. Perhaps this person had only left for half a day, or perhaps he had left a long time ago. It was impossible to distinguish, and it was obviously impossible to find this person by relying on this. Feng Xianzhao said, "There's no other way out of this place." He must have used some kind of artifact or talisman to travel underground. That place is vast and boundless, and trying to find them is like looking for a needle in a haystack. The mountain and sea realm was boundless, and if the cultivators of Junshin wanted to go to a place where there was no one around, it would be virtually impossible to find them. Both of them were well aware that their opponent was a cultivator of the Tao of Energy, who was not much weaker than cultivators of the 9 continents. The demons and devils of the mountain and sea realm couldn't possibly compare to them. Their concealment technique was definitely profound, and not something that could be easily detected. However, it wasn't as if they had come back empty-handed. The cave was truly small for cultivators, and from the way it was arranged, it was obvious that there weren't many Junshin cultivators. There weren't many Junshin cultivators who came, just below the 3 of them. Furthermore, they were afraid of being detected by the 9 continents' exalted true ones if they flew in the sky, so they could only travel underground. That way, they would be able to make some preparations. Qing Chenzi returned to the side of the pool. He felt that the other party must have had some use for it, so he flicked his sleeve. He prepared to take it back with him to the adepts of the various sections. Perhaps they would be able to learn something from it. The 2 of them searched the cave one last time, and seeing that there was nothing of value left, they returned to the surface. When they saw the light of day, Qing Chenzi said, "If we don't get rid of them, the 9 continents won't be at peace. When we get back, we should ask the adepts of the various sects to discuss how to find these Junshin cultivators as soon as possible." 2 months later, in the Origin Mirage Gate's headquarters, in the minor Heart World Mountain, the Grand Spirit Steel in the middle of the main hall suddenly trembled. A puff of smoke drifted by, and Adept Wei appeared outside. Her face was covered with a white veil, and she wore a moon-white gown. Her eyes were closed, and she seemed to be comprehending something. Currently, the adepts of the various sects were fighting in the void to increase their own battle prowess. However, the Origin Mirage Gate didn't need to do so. This sect treasure could simulate all opponents in the heart image, and although it was slightly different from the adepts, the magic power it consumed was negligible. After a long moment, she heard footsteps coming from behind her. She opened her eyes, and without turning her head, she said, "What is it?" The maidservant lowered her head and said, "Lady Lin has returned, Adept." Adept Wei turned around, turned into smoke, and floated away. In the next moment, she sat down on the jade couch and said, "Let her in." Not long after, a beautiful and flirtatious female disciple approached them. She said, "Disciple Lin Shihuan greets Adept." Adept Wei said indifferently, "How was your trip? Did you find anything?" Lin Shihuan said, "Adept, disciple and a group of fellow Taoists have worked together to investigate. For the past few decades, everything within a 5,000-kilometer radius of the entrance to the Earth Abyss has been as usual. There's nothing out of the ordinary. I presume those cultivators from beyond the heavens haven't come to our spirit gate." Adept Wei nodded lightly. This result was within her expectations. The Earth Abyss wasn't like other places. The entrance to the Earth Abyss wasn't big, so it was easy to search for it. She said, "You've worked hard to investigate for 2 months. Lin Shihuan said, "Disciple works for the sect, so how can it be considered hard?" Adept Wei said, "I've seen how diligent you've been lately. If you can win a spot in the competition between the disciples of the Spirit Gate's 6 sects and 28 sects, I'll allow you to enter the Heartstock Pavilion to comprehend our sect's secret arts." Lin Shihuan's eyes lit up, and she bowed. "Thank you, Disciple will definitely do her best." Adept Wei was about to say a few words of encouragement when she sensed something in her heart. She thought to herself, could Master have come out of seclusion? She waved her hand and said, "You may leave first." Lin Shihuan curtsied, lowered her head, and retreated with small steps. Adept Wei, on the other hand, turned into a wisp of smoke and arrived at the highest point of the palace. He saw Xue Dingyuan standing on the platform with his back to him in a white Taoist robe. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Disciple greets Master." Xue Dingyuan turned around and said, "Dispense with the formalities. I heard that the disciples of the 6 sects were searching outside. Did something big happen while I was away?" Adept Wei was about to speak, but when she looked up, she discovered that Xue Dingyuan's aura was different from usual. His gaze was deep and boundless. He was clearly standing there, but he seemed illusory, as if he could disappear from this world at any time. She forgot to reply for a moment, and said in surprise, "Master?" Xue Dingyuan nodded and said with a smile, "I've gained something from my seclusion this time. I didn't disappoint the fellow Taoists." Adept Wei's emotions surged. She bowed and said, "Disciple wishes Master a long life." Xue Dingyuan smiled. "Price." "Thank you, Master." Adept Wei stood up, and her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. She said, "Does Master want Disciple to inform the adepts of the various sects about this?" Xue Dingyuan said, "That should be the case. However, you just now said that there's some trouble in our sect. What's the matter?" Adept Wei said, "Master, you might not know this, but a few days ago, a cultivator from the Junqian realm snuck into our mountain and sea realm with the intention of spying on the situation of our 9 continents." She briefly explained the matter. Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment, then said, "If there really is a cultivator from the Junqian realm here and they've hidden in the western lands, then Master might have a way to solve this matter." Adept Wei said happily, "Master, do you have a way?" Xue Dingyuan nodded. "There's no rush. Go and invite the fellow Taoists here first." Adept Wei said yes, then waved her white hand and sent out several spirit messages. Not even an hour later, 3 spirit lights lit up on the high platform, and 3 formation doors appeared. Yuan Hongyang, Wenqing Xiang, and Hibiko Higashi stepped out. They already knew about the news, and when they saw Xue Dingyuan, they came forward and cupped their fists, saying, "Congratulations, Sect Master Xue, for your transcendence." Xue Dingyuan returned the greeting, then said seriously, "Fellow Taoists from the various sects helped me before, so now it's my turn to help you." Ever since Liang Shuani ascended, the 6 sects of the spiritual gate had no enlightened masters who had ascended to hold down the fort. The sects needed the Qinsong school's black tortoise to hold down the fort. In order to change the situation, under Yuan Hongyang's leadership, everyone gave most of the pure spirit qi to Xue Dingyuan for his cultivation, hoping that he could take a step forward. From this, it could be seen that as the leader of the spiritual gate, Yuan Hongyang was broad-minded enough to consider the big picture. Not only was he not afraid of the Origin Mirage Gate overtaking the Nether Spring sect, he also did not mind Xue Dingyuan replacing him after he succeeded. However, this was also a risky move. If Xue Dingyuan could achieve mortal shedding, it would not be difficult for him to go to the outer heavens to collect pure spirit qi, and he would also give them something in return. But if he failed, then not only would all their previous efforts go down the drain, even their cultivation progress would be affected, and they would fall behind the profound gate by hundreds of years. However, Xue Dingyuan did not disappoint them in the end. In the end, he succeeded and became the first mortal shedding cultivator after the spiritual gate entered the mountain and sea realm. For him to be able to reach this step, it was also because of the situation. With the full support of the six sects, it was equivalent to gathering the power of such a large spirit gate for him to cultivate alone. From now on, it was likely that no one else would have this kind of opportunity. After Yuan Hongyang congratulated him, he said, "Enlightened Master Wei's Talisman book said that Sect Master Xue has a way to deal with the cultivator of the Junqian realm?" Xue Dingyuan said, "After I entered this realm, I know where I come and go, and I have comprehended many divine abilities. If the cultivator of the Junqian realm is really as fellow Taoist Shaoqing said, and has already escaped to the western lands, then he will come back sooner or later to scout for information. I can borrow the help of the great spiritual monument to spread the mirage qi and cover the western wasteland. As long as the person comes into contact with a trace of spiritual opportunity, he will enter my mirage realm. If I let him see, he will see. If I let him hear, he will hear. Everything he thinks and sees will be illusory, as if he has fallen into a dream, as if he has fallen into the cycle of reincarnation. This way, I can eliminate his thoughts." Chapter 1359. P.S. Here's today's update, and at the same time, poll votes for the Chidian 515 Fan Festival. Everyone has 8 votes, and the votes will give you some coins. I'm begging for everyone's support and appreciation. Xian Qi rolled in the sky, and then the clouds parted, revealing a giant single-horned beast with 4 short limbs and thick fur. With a deep moo, it slowly descended. Zhang Yan was wearing a black cloak, and he was sitting on the back of the beast. During this period of time, he did not seclude himself in the sect, but went to the void sky to collect qi in preparation for the next seclusion. Because in a few months, it would be the time of Zhou Changju's reincarnation, so he came back from the void sky first. During this trip, he discovered that the ox porpoise that Zhang Changjin offered him was unexpectedly useful. This beast was very intelligent. It only needed to be taught once for it to be able to distinguish where the spiritual vigor of the purple clear sky was thick and where it was thin. Moreover, this beast could travel freely in the void, so there was no need for him to waste time looking for Qingling. All he had to do was meditate on its back, and when he reached the boundary, he could pluck it. After 2 months, the harvest was more than what he had gained in the past half a year. Seeing that they were almost at the floating sky palace, he stood up from the beast's back and said, "You can go look for food." After saying that, he leaped down and landed on the outer hall of the Duzhen Hall. With another thought, the Duzhen Hall master's seal on his body shone brightly, and a formation door appeared in front of him. He stepped into it, and when he reappeared, he was already in the inner hall. When he sat down, there was a flash of light in front of him, and the formation spirit appeared from the. It bowed and said, "Welcome back, master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "I just saw that the number of disciples patrolling outside is several times more than before. Did anything big happen in the sect during the months I was away?" The formation spirit said, "There is indeed one thing. Not long after Master left, there were cultivators from the Junqian realm sneaking into our mountain and sea realm. One of them seems to be a descendant of the Gong clan of the Eastern Wasteland, and now he has been captured. It is said that there is more than one of them, and the rest of them are hiding somewhere." So Spiritual Master Qi increased the number of people patrolling, and sped up the construction of the formation, to prevent this person from sneaking in. When Zhang Yan heard that the Junqian realm cultivators were here, He instantly understood that it was the same as when he had sent Sima Quan to that place. They had been sent here to scout. However, this was actually a piece of good news. It meant that the opponent was very cautious and would not dare to act blindly without understanding the situation. It seemed that he would have more time to prepare for his cultivation. He asked a few more questions, but the formation spirit's knowledge was limited. Most of it came from the mouths of the cultivators outside. He didn't know the specifics of the situation, so he waved his sleeve and ordered Jing Yu to leave. He flicked his finger and a spiritual light flew out of the hall. After a while, Jing Yu came into the hall and bowed. This lowly one greets Master. Just now this lowly one is being held up by the leader of the Mastiff tribe, He Fong. Please forgive me for not being able to welcome you in time. Zhang Yan asked curiously, He Fong? Why is he looking for you? Jing Yu replied, Master, the mountain and sea realm is rich in spiritual opportunity, and it's also a vast land mass. He Fong hopes that Master will allow him to exile his clan members who have committed crimes and allow them to live in this realm. If this is done, the descendants of this tribe are willing to be Master's vassals for generations to come. The Mastiffs were a tribe of the mountain and sea realm. They were captured by the great underworld patriarch from the outer world and used as slaves. However, they had always only respected the previous Hall Master Du Zhen. In other words, they only respected the position, not the people. If Zhang Yan wasn't the Mastiff, they wouldn't listen to his orders. However, as long as he was the Hall Master, even if the previous Hall Master Zhui Yuming returned, he wouldn't be able to order them around. Zhang Yan thought about it and immediately understood He Fong's goal. To these Mastiffs, deep down in their hearts, they didn't want to be slaves here for generations. The leader of the Mastiffs, He Fong, was quite quick-witted. The so-called crimes were just an excuse. He just wanted to find a way out for his tribesmen. He thought about it for a moment. Although he had no use for these Ho people, he could make them guards for his disciples. He said, Later, go tell He Fong that I agree to his request. In this world, if there are any other clans that want to move their clansmen to live outside, I can also let them go. Jing Yu said, That's not true. It's just that these Mastiffs who love to eat raw meat have big thoughts. Those Jing people are very obedient and are afraid that Master will chase them out. Zhang Yan said, If there's something like this in the future, you can arrange it yourself. There's no need to ask me. Jing Yu nodded and asked carefully, Master, why are you looking for me just now? Zhang Yan said, Just now, I heard that cultivators from the Junshan realm have sneaked into this world. Tell me in detail. Jing Yu naturally knew about this matter in great detail, and told the whole story from beginning to end. After Zhang Yan heard it, he thought for a while and said, The cultivators of the Junshan realm should have talismans to hide their aura. This should be done by the monarchs of the realm. It might even be that Kong Ying. Plus, the West is boundless. No wonder the Taoists of the sects didn't wait for this person. Jing Yu said, Master, could it be that the cultivators of the Junshan realm haven't gone far and are still hiding in the four borders waiting for a chance? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Previously, they indeed had a chance, but now that the sects have strengthened their guard and there is also the Earth Vein spiritual opportunity formation, if they dare to make a move, they will immediately be discovered by us. If they stay, they can't do anything. The only way to survive is to avoid the barren land. The cultivators of the Junshan realm took one wrong step after another. Previously, they thought that they could use their relationship with the Gong family to make the Eastern Barren country cooperate with them. But they didn't know that things were different now. Instead, they exposed their existence and fell into a disadvantageous situation. Just as they were talking, a disciple on duty outside the hall said, Hall Master, just now, there's a letter coming in from outside. Zhang Yan ordered him to bring it over. He opened it and said in surprise, So enlightened Master Xue has entered the mortal transformation realm. He nodded and said, This is good news. All these years, because there were no ascended enlightened masters in the Spirit Gate, they couldn't defend against the attacks of the demonic ancestor. That was why he kept the divine beast Black Tortoise in the abyss. Now, he could summon it back. Reading further, Xue Dingyuan said that he could use the Spirit Return Great Spirit Steel to set up Shin Qi in the west sky. If the cultivators of the Junshin realm came, they could drag them into an illusion. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the situation of the 9 continents being discovered. However, he wasn't strong enough and needed help. That was why he sent a letter to ask for help. When Zhang Yan saw this, he smiled and understood the intention of the other party to send this letter. Xue Dingyuan's spell this time was to land on Shaoqing's land. However, the problem was that Sect Master Yu was still beyond the sky, and Ying Chuanqiu was still in seclusion. No one knew if he had succeeded. Under such circumstances, Xue Dingyuan couldn't act rashly. There were no cultivators with similar skills present. Even the Shaoqing cultivators were willing to let him try. If he didn't act rashly, he wouldn't be able to explain himself if something happened here in the future. That was why he sent a letter to discuss with Zhang Yan. He invited him to come along so that he could be a witness. As for helping him, it was just an excuse. After reading the letter, Zhang Yan decided to move out immediately. After all, this was related to the safety of the 9 continents. It wasn't convenient to delay it. After giving a few instructions, he stood up and left the hall. He called out in his heart and heard a mooing sound. The ox porpoise floated over from the sky. It prostrated in front of him. He flew through the air and sat down on the couch. With a call, the ox porpoise floated up and went into the sky. Then, it teleported in the southwest direction. A month later, he arrived in front of the abyss. Looking down, he saw mountain ranges and shadows of mountains. The abyss was nowhere to be seen. He circulated his martial arts to take a closer look. However, the mountains and rivers were lumps of blurry mist. He thought, this should be the arrangement of this sect Master Xue. However, it's quite similar to the profound Yin fantasy realm. Once outsiders come here, they'll only be able to go around in this fantasy realm without the permission of the person who cast the spell. They won't be able to reach the entrance of the abyss in the real world. At that moment, a mist gathered and a human figure gathered. Xue Dingyuan appeared in front of him. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist Zhang, I'm really uneasy to trouble you to come here." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Taoist Xue, you're too courteous. I know your worries. Since I'm from the sects of the 9 continents, I will go with you." Xue Dingyuan said, "Thank you, Taoist Xue." Zhang Yan said, "It's all right. Is the method that Taoist Xue is using what I see in front of me?" Xue Dingyuan said, "It's slightly similar, but also different. The abyss is only 10,000 miles in circumference. It won't take long to set it up. The western wasteland is vast. We'll need to borrow the Spirit Return Great Spiritual Tablet to spread the Sea Serpent Qi among the spiritual vigor. It won't show any illusions. What we see on normal days will be the same as before." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Taoist Xue's method is good. If the Junshin realm fails this time, there will be a next time. With your Sea Serpent Qi, we can make them send some false information back." Xue Dingyuan smiled and asked, "Do you want me to exaggerate?" Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. "There's no need for that. If we exaggerate too much, not only will it make the other party suspicious, it will also show that we're weak. They can try their best to belittle us. It's fine even if we exaggerate a little. With Kong Yin's ability, the more we exaggerate, the less he will act rashly." Xue Dingyuan nodded and suddenly asked, "What if he really comes?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "We've never been able to control when the Junshin realm cultivators will come. If he really comes, it'll just be a battle." On the vast plains, the Elder and Song Zhenjuan traveled to the west. They were already deep in the western continent. They were very patient. Since they didn't have a chance in the near future, they were prepared to lie low and go back to scout for information after a dozen years. As for the Wanbei worms, they were fine as long as they didn't take them out and kept them in the worm sack. They traveled for a few months and went further and further away. As they were cultivators of the Qi path, they yearned for clean air. After traveling underground for a long time, they felt suffocated. Thus, They concealed themselves and came to the surface to bathe in the sunlight and spiritual vigor. When they were outside, what they saw was the vast land. There were countless demonic horses galloping on the plains. The scene was spectacular and they felt relieved. Song Jinjuan looked into the distance. Suddenly, his divine power moved and he said, "True Lord Wu, look at that mountain in the distance. Doesn't it look like a dilapidated palace?" The crowned elder turned his head to take a look, and after a moment, he said, "Now that you mention it, it really does look a little similar. Moreover, it's not just this place, the surrounding mountains seem to be the same, as if they were originally one." The two of them looked at each other and were shocked. If the surrounding scattered mountains were all a broken corner of the same palace, then the scale of the palace would be unimaginable. The elder said in a deep voice, "Since we're here, let's go and take a look. We might find something." Song Jinjuan agreed. The two of them rose at the same time and flew toward one of the mountains. "It's going to be 515 soon. I hope I can continue to charge at the 515 red packet ranking. On the 15th of May, the red packet reign will be able to give back to the readers and promote my works. Being together is also love. I'll definitely do my best." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.